London, 1844. A forgotten daughter stood in the shadows while her family sold her sisters like prized cattle. But when the most powerful duke in England rejected every perfect bride and demanded the woman they didn't show me, everything changed. This is the story of Elena Harrow, the woman society erased, and the duke who burned the world down to find her. If you love stories where the underdog rises and love conquers all, stay until the end. You won't believe what happens when she finally speaks her truth. Like this video if you're watching from your city, and drop a comment telling us where you're from. The rain hammered against the windows of Harrow House like accusations, each drop a reminder of everything Elena had learned to accept about herself. Unwanted, unremarkable, unseen. She stood in the corner of the drawing room, her hands folded carefully over the worn fabric of her gray dress. The same dress she'd worn to every social gathering for the past 2 years. Not because she loved it, not because it flattered her, but because her mother, the formidable Lady Margaret Harrow, had decided long ago that Elena wasn't worth the investment of fine clothes. "Stand still, Mary Ann," Lady Margaret commanded, circling Elena's younger sister like a general inspecting troops before battle. "Your posture must be flawless tonight. Lord Pemberton will be at the Ashford ball, and his fortune is substantial." Mary Ann, 17 and gleaming in a gown of ivory silk that had cost more than Elena's entire wardrobe, preened under their mother's attention. Her golden curls had been arranged in an elaborate style that had required 2 hours and 3 servants. Diamonds, real diamonds, glittered at her throat. Elena's throat was bare. It had always been bare. "And you, Catherine," Lady Margaret continued, turning to Elena's middle sister, "must laugh at Lord Ashford's jokes, no matter how tedious. He controls half the shipping routes to India. A connection there could change everything for this family." Catherine nodded eagerly, her rose-colored gown rustling with imported French lace. At 19, she had already received 4 marriage proposals, each one more advantageous than the last. Lady Margaret had refused them all, holding out for something better, something grander. Elena watched from her corner, invisible as always. "Mother," Mary Ann said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "should Elena even attend tonight? People have begun to talk. They say it's strange that she comes to every ball, but never dances." "Mrs. Pemberton called her the Harrow ghost last week." Lady Margaret's lips thinned into a disapproving line. Her eyes, cold, calculating, flicked toward Elena with the same expression she might give a piece of furniture that had outlived its usefulness. "Elena will attend," she said curtly. "Her absence would raise more questions than her presence. But she will stay in the background, as she always does. She knows her place." The words should have hurt. Once, years ago, they would have. But Elena had developed something more valuable than her mother's approval. She had developed armor. She didn't flinch, didn't react. Simply stood there with her hands folded, her face serene, giving them nothing. This only seemed to irritate Mary Ann more. "But Mother, she makes us look bad," Mary Ann pressed, examining her reflection in the gilt mirror with obvious satisfaction. "Standing there in that dreadful dress, hiding behind pillars like some kind of servant. The other families must think we can't afford to present her properly." "The other families," Lady Margaret said icily, "think exactly what I want them to think. That Elena is not our priority because she is not worth prioritizing. Your beauty and Catherine's charm are this family's assets. Elena is—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Adequate, at best." Elena's fingers tightened imperceptibly against her dress, but her face remained still. She had learned, over years of this treatment, to hide every emotion behind a mask of polite indifference, because showing pain only gave them more ammunition. "I understand, Mother," Elena said quietly, her voice steady despite the familiar ache in her chest. "Shall I fetch your shawl for the carriage?" Lady Margaret waved a dismissive hand. "Mary will do it. You're useless at remembering which one I prefer." She turned back to her younger daughters, her voice warming in a way it never did for Elena. "Now, my darlings, let's discuss your strategy for tonight. The season is half over, and we must secure at least one engagement before it ends." Elena slipped from the room unnoticed. She climbed the narrow servants' staircase to her bedroom, the smallest in the house, located in the north wing where the heating barely reached and the wallpaper peeled in long, sad strips. While Mary Ann and Catherine each had rooms 3 times the size with views of the garden, Elena's single window overlooked the alley where the dustmen came each morning. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed and stared at her reflection in the small, tarnished mirror. The woman looking back at her was not ugly. She was not deformed or scarred. Her features were regular, pleasant even, dark hair, gray eyes, a face that might have been called handsome if anyone had bothered to look at it properly. But in the marriage market of London's aristocracy, pleasant was the same as invisible. Beauty, like Mary Ann's open doors. Charm, like Catherine's secured proposals. But ordinariness, like Elena's, that earned you nothing but corners to hide in and whispers about why your own family couldn't be bothered to dress you properly. 2 years ago, when Elena was 21, Lady Margaret had finally allowed her to attend her first season. It had been a disaster from the start. While other mothers paraded their daughters before eligible bachelors, Lady Margaret had kept Elena firmly in the background, introducing Mary Ann instead, even though Mary Ann had been only 15 and technically too young for formal courtship. "This is my daughter Mary Ann," Lady Margaret would say, her voice warm with pride. "And this is Elena." Always an afterthought, always a footnote. The few men who had been polite enough to ask Elena to dance had done so out of obligation, their eyes already scanning the room for more promising partners. She had learned to recognize that look, the one that said, "You're not good enough," before the music even started. By her second season, even those obligatory dances had stopped. Now, at 23, Elena had accepted her role, the family's invisible daughter, kept around for appearances but never truly included. The daughter who would likely never marry, who would spend her life as the spinster aunt taking care of her sister's children while they lived the glittering lives she would never have. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Elena?" The voice belonged to Annie, one of the housemaids, the only servant who still treated Elena with genuine kindness. "Your mother says the carriage is ready." Elena rose, smoothing the wrinkles from her gray dress. The fabric was good quality once, but that had been 3 years ago. Now it was faded and outdated, the hem slightly frayed where she'd caught it on a door. She'd asked once, just once, if she might have a new dress for the season. Lady Margaret had laughed, actually laughed. "Why waste good fabric on you? No one looks at you anyway." As Elena descended the grand staircase, she could hear her mother's voice echoing through the foyer, sharp with instructions. "Remember, Mary Ann, eyes down when Lord Pemberton first approaches, then look up through your lashes. Men are fools for that innocent look. Catherine, stay close to Lady Ashford. She controls her son's marriage prospects absolutely. Flatter her gown, her taste, her insipid little dog if you must." The Harrow sisters assembled in the foyer like soldiers preparing for war. Mary Ann and Catherine glittered like jewels in the candlelight, their gowns cut to perfection, their jewelry sparkling. Lady Margaret herself wore burgundy silk with sapphires that had been in the family for 3 generations. And then there was Elena, in her faded gray dress with its high neckline and long sleeves, designed to help her disappear into the wallpaper. The carriage ride to the Ashford ball was 20 minutes of pointed silence. Lady Margaret spent the time coaching Mary Ann on which topics to discuss with Lord Pemberton, while Catherine practiced her laugh, a delicate musical sound that she'd perfected specifically to charm potential suitors. Elena stared out the window at the gas-lit streets of London, watching the city blur past in shades of gold and shadow. She had developed a game over the years, a way to survive these endless evenings: observation. While her sisters hunted for husbands and her mother calculated social advantages, Elena watched people, really watched them. She noticed things others missed: the way Lord Bradford's smile never reached his eyes when he danced with his wife, the way Lady Thornbury's hands trembled when she stood too close to her husband, the way the younger sons of noble families drank just a little too much, trying to drown the bitterness of being born second. This world, Elena had learned, was built on beautiful lies. Everyone wore masks. Everyone played roles. She was simply the only one honest enough to admit she didn't belong. The Ashford mansion blazed with light, every window glowing like a beacon against the dark London sky. Carriages lined the circular drive, depositing their precious cargo of eligible daughters and hunting sons. Inside, the ballroom was a spectacle of excess: crystal chandeliers dripping with candles, walls hung with silk, an orchestra playing Strauss. The air smelled of expensive perfume, champagne, and desperation. Lady Margaret swept in like a general leading a campaign, Marianne and Catherine flanking her like prized weapons. Elena followed 3 steps behind, already cataloging which pillar would provide the best vantage point for the evening. "Marianne, darling!" Lady Pemberton descended upon them immediately, her calculating eyes sweeping over Marianne like a merchant appraising merchandise. "You look absolutely radiant. My son will be devastated he missed your entrance. He's in the card room with Lord Ashford." Lady Margaret's smile could have cut glass. "How fortunate. Perhaps you might mention to him that Marianne is particularly fond of poetry. She's been reading Byron obsessively." This was a lie. Marianne had never read Byron. She'd never read anything if she could help it. But Lady Margaret was a master strategist, and she knew Lord Pemberton fancied himself an intellectual. As her mother and Marianne worked the room, Elena drifted to her usual spot, a pillar near the east wall, partially hidden by a potted palm, with a clear view of the entire ballroom. From here, she could see everything. Lady Ashford holding court by the refreshment table, her daughter beside her looking miserable in a gown that was clearly too tight. The Thornbury twins flirting aggressively with a visiting French comte who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Lord Bradford already half drunk, his wife pretending not to notice. "Still hiding, I see." Elena didn't startle. She recognized the voice. Thomas Wentworth, a distant cousin who attended these events out of family obligation rather than any hope of finding a bride. He was 32, balding, and brutally honest, which made him one of the few people Elena could tolerate. "Still drinking, I see," Elena replied calmly, nodding toward the glass in his hand. Thomas raised it in mock salute, to surviving another tedious evening of watching peacocks parade. He took a sip, then studied Elena with shrewd eyes. "Your mother is really laying it on thick tonight. Marianne's had 4 introductions in 10 minutes. Is she trying to marry her off before midnight?" "Lord Pemberton has 30,000 a year and no close relatives to contest the inheritance," Elena said. "Mother won't rest until the engagement is secured." "And you?" Thomas asked. "Still content to watch from the shadows?" Elena's smile was small and sad. "Content implies I have a choice." Thomas's expression softened. "You know, Elena, you're far more interesting than either of your sisters. If these fools had any sense, but they don't," Elena interrupted gently, "and I stopped waiting for sense years ago." Before Thomas could respond, a ripple of excitement swept through the ballroom. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Heads turned toward the entrance. Even the orchestra seemed to play a little louder. "Good God," Thomas muttered. "Is that—" It was. Duke Adrian Blackthorne had arrived. Elena had never seen the Duke in person, but she'd heard the stories. Everyone had. At 29, he was the wealthiest, most powerful nobleman in England, possibly in all of Europe. His family's fortune was so vast that rumor claimed he could buy and sell half of Parliament without noticing the expense. He was also notoriously difficult to impress. In the 3 years since inheriting his title, he had rejected every marriage prospect presented to him. Beautiful heiresses, accomplished musicians, daughters of foreign dignitaries, none had interested him. Society whispered that he was impossible to please, that he would die a bachelor rather than settle for anything less than perfection. And yet here he was, striding into the Ashford ballroom like a conquering emperor. He was tall, taller than Elena had expected, with dark hair and the kind of aristocratic features that looked like they'd been carved from marble. But it was his eyes that struck her, dark, intelligent, and currently sweeping over the assembled crowd with obvious disinterest. Every unmarried woman in the room straightened. Mothers grabbed their daughters and began positioning them strategically. Lady Margaret's eyes lit up with predatory hunger as she immediately began redirecting Marianne toward the Duke's path. But Adrian Blackthorne walked past them all. He nodded politely to Lord Ashford, declined a glass of champagne from a hovering servant, and surveyed the ballroom with the expression of a man attending his own execution. "Poor bastard," Thomas said. "They'll circle him like sharks within minutes." He was right. Already Lady Pemberton was steering her niece in the Duke's direction. Lady Thornbury had dispatched both twins on an intercept course. Even Lady Ashford was maneuvering, despite her daughter's obvious misery. But something strange happened. As each woman approached with practiced smiles and careful curtsies, the Duke dismissed them with brutal efficiency. A few words, a polite but final nod, and they were sent away like servants who had forgotten their place. One after another, the most beautiful, most accomplished, most well-connected women in London were rejected. The ballroom buzzed with confused whispers. This wasn't how these things worked. A duke didn't simply refuse everyone. Even if he wasn't interested in marriage, protocol demanded he at least dance with the daughters of important families. But Adrian Blackthorne didn't seem to care about protocol. Elena watched, fascinated, as he cut through the social games like a knife through silk. There was something almost aggressive about his rejections, as if he were punishing them all for wasting his time. "He's looking for someone," Elena murmured. Elena. Thomas glanced at her. "What makes you say that?" "Look at his eyes. He's not bored. He's frustrated. He came here expecting to find something, and he's disappointed." "Well, whatever he's looking for, he won't find it in this peacock parade," Thomas said. "I should rescue him before Lady Pemberton tries again. That woman has the tenacity of a bulldog." As Thomas left to intercept the Duke, Elena stayed by her pillar, content to observe. But then something impossible happened. The Duke's eyes swept across the ballroom one final time and stopped. On her. Elena felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. For a moment she was certain she was imagining it. Men like Adrian Blackthorne didn't look at women like Elena Harrow. They looked through them, past them, never at them. But he was definitely looking. And then he started walking. Not toward Lady Margaret and Marianne, not toward any of the glittering beauties positioned like prizes around the room. Toward her. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. This was wrong. This didn't happen. Dukes didn't cross ballrooms to speak to invisible daughters hiding behind pillars. She glanced around, certain he must be heading toward someone else, someone behind her, someone worthy of his attention. But there was no one. Just Elena, in her faded gray dress, pressed against a pillar like she was trying to become part of the architecture. The Duke stopped 3 feet away. Up close, he was even more imposing, not just in height or bearing, but in the intensity of his focus. When he looked at her, it felt like he was actually seeing her, not the role she'd been assigned or the invisible space she occupied. It felt terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "Miss Harrow," he said, and his voice was deep, cultured, with an edge of something Elena couldn't quite identify. "I've been looking for you." The ballroom fell silent. Every eye in the room turned toward them. Elena could feel the weight of their stares, the shock rippling through the crowd like a wave. The Duke had just acknowledged her, spoken to her by name, crossed the room specifically to find her. Lady Margaret looked like she might faint from confusion. Marianne's expression was pure outrage. How dare the Duke choose the invisible sister over the beauty? But Elena, standing there in her corner with the most powerful man in England waiting for her response, felt something she hadn't felt in years. Absolutely, completely terrified. Because this kind of attention didn't happen to women like her. And when the impossible happened, it usually meant something was about to go very, very wrong. "Your Grace," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "I believe you have me confused with someone else. I'm quite certain we've never met." His smile was slight but genuine. "We haven't, but I've been searching for you regardless." The whispers exploded around them like fireworks. "Searching for her? Why?" "That's the plain one, isn't it? The one Lady Harrow never bothers to dress properly? What could he possibly want with her?" Adrian Blackthorne didn't seem to hear them. His attention was fixed entirely on Elena, waiting for her response with the patience of a man who was used to getting what he wanted. Elena's mind raced. This was a mistake. It had to be. Men like him didn't search for women like her unless they wanted something that would benefit them and destroy her. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to disappear back into the safety of invisibility. But there was something in his eyes, something that looked almost like recognition, that made her hesitate. "Why?" she asked simply. It was the wrong question for a proper young lady. She should have blushed and stammered and thanked him for the attention. But Elena had spent too many years being ignored to waste time on performances. If the Duke was surprised by her directness, he didn't show it. Instead, his smile widened slightly. "Because," he said. 3 years ago, I saw a woman reading beneath a willow tree in Hyde Park. She was alone, completely absorbed in her book, and she didn't notice me watching. I've spent 3 years trying to find her again." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're her." Elena's breath caught. She remembered that day. Remembered escaping to the park with a volume of philosophy she'd borrowed from her father's library. Remembered sitting beneath the willow for hours, grateful for a few stolen moments away from her mother's criticisms and her sister's cruelty. She had been alone, or so she'd thought. "You must be mistaken," she said, but her voice wavered. "I'm no one. I'm nothing special." "That," Adrian Blackthorne said quietly, "is where you're wrong." And before Elena could respond, before she could process what was happening, the Duke did something that shattered every rule of London society. He bowed to her. Not a polite nod, not a formal acknowledgement, a full, deep bow. The kind reserved for royalty. The kind that told everyone in the room exactly how much he valued the woman standing before him. "Miss Harrow," he said, straightening, "would you do me the honor of dancing with me?" The ballroom erupted in chaos. Elena's hand trembled as she placed it in the Duke's outstretched palm. The orchestra, which had fallen into confused silence, suddenly struck up a waltz. The crowd parted like water before a ship's bow, creating a path to the center of the ballroom floor. Elena could feel every eye boring into her back as Adrian led her forward, his grip steady and warm against her cold fingers. "Breathe," he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. "They're only people." "People who are currently wondering if you've lost your mind," Elena whispered back. His lips quirked. "Let them wonder." They reached the center of the floor, and Adrian turned to face her, his hand settling at her waist with practiced ease. Elena placed her free hand on his shoulder, acutely aware that her faded gray dress looked even shabbier next to his immaculate black evening wear. The music began. Elena had waltzed before, during her first disastrous season, with men who counted the seconds until they could escape. But this was different. Adrian moved with fluid confidence, guiding her through the steps as if they'd danced together 100 times. "You're good at this," she said, focusing on the steps to avoid the hundreds of stairs surrounding them. "I've had practice." He paused. "Though I've never enjoyed it until now." Elena risked a glance at his face. He was watching her with that same intense focus, as if she were the only person in the entire ballroom. "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why me? You could have any woman here. Women who are beautiful, accomplished, who actually matter. You matter." His voice was firm, cutting through her protest. "And you're wrong about the rest. Those women are performing. You're real." "I'm invisible," Elena corrected. "There's a difference." "No," Adrian said quietly. "You're overlooked. Also a difference." The waltz carried them past Lady Margaret, whose face had gone through several shades of purple, before settling on a calculating expression. Elena could practically see her mother's mind working, trying to determine how to exploit this unexpected development. "Your mother seems displeased," Adrian observed. "My mother is always displeased, usually with me." Elena caught herself. "I apologize, Your Grace. That was inappropriate." "Adrian," he said, "and honesty is never inappropriate. It's refreshingly rare." They turned again, and Elena spotted Marianne standing near the refreshment table, her beautiful face twisted with undisguised fury. Catherine stood beside her, whispering urgently, both of them staring at Elena with identical expressions of betrayed rage. "Your sisters look like they'd enjoy pushing you down the stairs," Adrian remarked, following her gaze. Despite herself, Elena almost smiled. "They've considered it, I'm sure." "Why do they hate you?" The question was so direct it caught Elena off guard. In polite society, people danced around ugly truths. They didn't simply ask them. "I exist," she said finally. "That's enough." Adrian's hand tightened fractionally at her waist. "Explain." Elena hesitated. She'd spent years hiding the truth, pretending everything was fine, accepting her role as the family disappointment. But something about Adrian's steady gaze made her want to be honest. "My mother has limited resources and unlimited ambition," she said quietly. "She made a calculation when I was 15. invest everything in Marianne and Catherine, who are beautiful enough to marry well and minimize losses on me, who isn't. It's simple economics. That's monstrous. That's practical, Elena corrected. In this world, women are investments. Some pay dividends, others don't. The music swelled around them, and Adrian guided her through a complex turn that brought them dangerously close together. Elena could smell his cologne, something expensive with notes of sandalwood and smoke. "And what do you believe?" he asked. "About your worth?" Elena had never been asked that question, not by anyone. "I believe," she said slowly, "that I'm smart enough to survive in a world that wants me to disappear. That's worth something." "It's worth everything," Adrian said, and there was something fierce in his voice that made Elena's breath catch. The waltz ended too soon. Adrian stepped back and bowed formally, but his eyes never left hers. The applause around them sounded strangely muted, as if the entire ballroom were holding its breath. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Harrow," Adrian said, loud enough for nearby listeners to hear. Then, quieter. "May I call on you tomorrow? At Harrow House?" Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. A formal call meant courtship. It meant intentions. It meant the Duke of Blackthorn was publicly declaring interest in the daughter no one wanted. Yes, she managed. Tomorrow would be acceptable." Lady Margaret materialized at Elena's elbow before Adrian could respond, her smile so brittle it could shatter glass. "Your Grace, what an unexpected pleasure," she gushed, her voice dripping with false warmth. "I had no idea you were acquainted with our Elena. She's such a quiet girl, we often forget she's even present." She laughed as if this were charming instead of cruel. Adrian's expression went cold. "Then you should pay closer attention, Lady Harrow. I find your daughter quite unforgettable." Lady Margaret's smile froze. "Of course, Your Grace. How lovely. I'm sure you'd also enjoy meeting my daughter Marianne. She's received so many compliments this evening. Shall I introduce you?" "That won't be necessary," Adrian said flatly. "I have no interest in meeting your other daughters. Elena is the only Harrow who matters to me." The words landed like bombs in the middle of the ballroom. Elena heard gasps from the surrounding crowd, saw Lady Margaret's face flush with humiliation and rage. But Adrian simply bowed once more to Elena, nodded curtly to Lady Margaret, and walked away, leaving chaos in his wake. The carriage ride home was silent as a tomb. Lady Margaret sat rigid in her seat, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Marianne stared out the window, her jaw set in furious lines. Catherine kept glancing between Elena and their mother, her expression torn between jealousy and fear. Elena had learned long ago that silence was safer than speech in moments like these. So she sat still, hands folded, waiting for the storm. It broke the moment they entered Harrow House. "What?" Lady Margaret said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Did you do?" Elena met her mother's eyes. "I danced with the Duke, at his request." "Don't play innocent with me." Lady Margaret advanced on her, fury radiating from every line of her body. "You must have done something, said something. No man like that simply chooses a girl like you without manipulation." "A girl like me," Elena repeated calmly. "You mean your daughter?" "I mean a plain, unremarkable girl with no fortune and no prospects," Lady Margaret spat. "The Duke could have anyone. Why would he want you unless you'd somehow tricked him?" Marianne stepped forward, her beautiful face ugly with rage. "She must have told him lies about us, about me. She's jealous because I'm prettier, so she poisoned him against me." "I've never spoken to the Duke before tonight," Elena said. "I didn't even know he'd be at the ball." "Liar!" Marianne shrieked. "You've been scheming behind our backs, trying to steal what should be mine." "What should be yours?" Elena's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "The Duke isn't a prize to be won, Marianne. He's a person who made his own choice. A choice you manipulated." Lady Margaret grabbed Elena's arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "I don't know what game you're playing, but it ends now. Tomorrow, when the Duke calls, you will tell him you made a mistake. You'll say you're not interested in his courtship. You'll redirect his attention to Marianne, where it belongs." Elena pulled her arm free, something breaking inside her. "No, The single word hung in the air like a declaration of war. Lady Margaret's eyes widened. In 23 years, Elena had never directly refused her, never fought back, never said no. "What did you say?" Her voice was deadly quiet. "I said no." Elena's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady. "I will not refuse the Duke. I will not lie for Marianne's benefit. If he wants to court me, that's his decision, and mine." The slap came so fast, Elena barely saw it coming. Pain exploded across her cheek as Lady Margaret struck her hard enough to snap her head to the side. "You ungrateful little wretch," Lady Margaret hissed. "After everything I've done for you, fed you, clothed you, given you a home when you've done nothing to deserve it. And this is how you repay me? By stealing your sister's chance at happiness?" Elena touched her burning cheek, tasting blood where her teeth had cut her lip, but she didn't back down. "You've done nothing for me," she said quietly. "You've tolerated my existence while making sure I knew how worthless you found it. But I'm not worthless, and I won't pretend to be anymore." Marianne lunged forward, but Catherine grabbed her arm. "Mother, if she refuses the Duke, it will cause a scandal. He made his interest public. If Elena rejects him now, people will ask why. They'll think something's wrong with our family." Lady Margaret's calculating mind seized on this immediately. Elena could see the moment her mother's rage transformed into cold strategy. "Fine," she said, her voice like ice. "You want the Duke's attention? You'll have it. But understand this, Elena, you will not embarrass this family. You will be perfect, charming, everything a Duke's wife should be. And when you inevitably fail, when he realizes what a poor choice you are, you will accept the consequences without complaint." She leaned closer, her breath hot against Elena's face. "Because you will fail. Men like him don't marry women like you. They use them and discard them. And when he's done with you, don't come crying to me." With that, Lady Margaret swept from the room, Marianne and Catherine trailing behind her like vengeful shadows. Elena stood alone in the foyer, her cheek throbbing, her hands trembling. She should have been afraid. Everything in her life had just changed, and she had no idea if Adrian's interest was genuine or some elaborate game she didn't understand. But instead of fear, Elena felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. The next morning arrived with gray skies and steady rain. Elena woke early, her cheeks still tender from Lady Margaret's slap. She dressed carefully in her only decent day dress, a simple blue muslin that was at least clean and properly fitted, even if it was 3 years out of fashion. Annie helped her arrange her hair in a simple knot, chattering nervously about the Duke's expected visit. "The whole household's talking about it, miss," Annie whispered. "Never thought I'd see the day when a Duke came calling for you. Begging your pardon, but it's like something from a fairy tale." "Fairy tales aren't real, Annie," Elena said quietly, "and neither are dukes who fall in love with invisible daughters." "But he danced with you, in front of everyone. That's got to mean something." Elena studied her reflection. The woman looking back was still plain, still ordinary. Nothing about her had changed overnight. "It means he's interested," she said finally. "But interested isn't the same as committed. People lose interest all the time." At precisely 2 o'clock, the Duke's carriage arrived. Elena watched from the drawing room window as Adrian emerged, immaculate in a dark coat and carrying a bouquet of white roses, the kind of roses that cost more than Elena's dress. Lady Margaret had assembled the entire family in the drawing room like troops preparing for inspection. Marianne sat rigid in her favorite chair, wearing a gown of pale pink silk that made her look like a porcelain doll. Catherine positioned herself by the fireplace in a calculated pose designed to showcase her profile. Even their father, the usually absent Lord Harrow, had been summoned for the occasion. "Remember," Lady Margaret hissed at Elena, "be charming, smile, defer to him, and for heaven's sake, don't say anything too intelligent. Men don't like clever women." The butler announced the Duke's arrival. Adrian entered the drawing room like he owned it, his presence somehow making the space feel smaller. His eyes immediately found Elena, and she saw something that looked like relief cross his face. "Your Grace," Lady Margaret simpered, executing an elaborate curtsy. "What an honor! May I present my husband, Lord Harrow, and our daughters Marianne and Catherine. I believe you've already met Elena." Adrian's attention didn't waver from Elena. "Lord Harrow, Lady Harrow, ladies, thank you for receiving me. He turned fully to Elena. Miss Harrow, I brought you these. I thought white roses might suit you. He handed her the bouquet directly, ignoring protocol that dictated he should have presented them to Lady Margaret first. Elena took them, acutely aware of Marianne's murderous glare. Thank you, Your Grace. They're beautiful. Please call me Adrian, at least when we're speaking privately. He glanced at Lady Margaret. Might I have permission to walk with Miss Elena in your gardens? With a proper chaperone, of course. Lady Margaret's smile could have frozen fire. Of course, Your Grace. What a lovely idea. Though I should mention the weather is rather unpleasant today. Perhaps you'd prefer to remain inside? Marianne plays the pianoforte beautifully. The gardens will be perfect, Adrian interrupted smoothly. I find I do my best thinking in the rain. They walked through the wet gardens under a large black umbrella, Lady Margaret's elderly maid trailing 15 feet behind as chaperone. The rain pattered against silk, creating a strange bubble of privacy in the midst of the downpour. Your mother doesn't like me, Adrian observed. My mother doesn't like anyone who disrupts her plans, Elena corrected. She had Marianne matched with you in her head before you even entered the ballroom. And yet I chose you. Why? The question burst out before Elena could stop it. I need to understand. This doesn't make sense. You're a duke. You could have anyone. Women who are beautiful, accomplished, who come with dowries and connections. I'm none of those things. So why? Adrian stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Rain dripped from the edges of the umbrella, creating a curtain around them. Do you remember what you were reading? He asked. That day in Hyde Park, 3 years ago. Elena's brow furrowed. Rousseau, I think. The Social Contract. A philosophy text, Adrian said. In French. You were so absorbed you didn't notice the storm clouds gathering. I watched you read through the first drops of rain, completely oblivious, until the downpour finally forced you to leave. Even then, you protected the book instead of yourself. You remember that? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. I've thought about it nearly every day since. Adrian's expression was serious, almost vulnerable. Do you know how rare it is to see someone completely unguarded? Not performing, not calculating, just existing? You were so focused, so present in that moment. And I thought, there's someone who knows who she is. I'm nobody, Elena protested. You're the woman who chose philosophy over finding a husband, who reads in public parks instead of attending social calls, who stands in corners watching everyone else play their games because you're too honest to play them yourself. He paused. You're the only genuine person I've met in this entire cursed city. Elena's heart hammered. You don't know me. Then let me. Adrian's voice was intense, urgent. That's what courtship is, isn't it? Learning each other. Discovering if what I saw in that moment was real or just a beautiful illusion. And if it was an illusion? Then we'll both know, he said simply. But I don't think it was. They walked in silence for a moment, Elena's mind racing. This was dangerous, terrifying. Everything she'd learned about self-protection screamed at her to run, to refuse, to disappear back into safe invisibility. But another part of her, the part that had been suffocating under years of neglect and cruelty, wanted desperately to believe him. My family will make this difficult, she said finally. Marianne is furious. My mother thinks I'm manipulating you. They'll do everything they can to sabotage this. Let them try. There was steel in Adrian's voice. I didn't build everything I have by backing down from opposition. This isn't business, Your Grace. Adrian, this is my life, my family. It's complicated. Complicated doesn't scare me. He stopped walking again, turning to face her. But I need to know something. Do you want this? Not what your mother wants, not what society expects. What do you want, Elena? No one had ever asked her that question. Elena looked up at him, this powerful man who had somehow seen her when she was invisible to everyone else, and made a choice that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. I want to know if this is real, she said quietly. I want to believe someone could choose me not because they have to, but because they want to. I want... She paused, gathering courage. I want to stop being invisible. Adrian's smile was slow and genuine. Then let's begin. Over the next 3 weeks, Adrian called on Elena 5 times. Each visit sparked fresh outrage from Marianne and increasingly desperate manipulation from Lady Margaret. They walked in gardens, discussed books in the Harrow Library, debated politics and philosophy over tea. Adrian brought her volumes she'd mentioned wanting to read, engaged her in conversations that left her intellectually exhilarated instead of bored and stifled. For the first time in her life, Elena felt seen. But London society was watching, and not everyone approved. The whispers grew louder with each visit. The plain Harrow girl has bewitched the Duke. He'll tire of her soon enough. Poor Marianne losing to her own sister. At a garden party hosted by Lady Pemberton, Elena overheard 2 women discussing her directly. She must have done something scandalous to catch his attention. No man chooses the wallflower over the beauty unless there's something untoward happening. I heard she threatened to expose some secret if he didn't court her. Blackmail, pure and simple. Elena's hands clenched around her teacup, but she said nothing. Confrontation would only add fuel to the rumors. Then Marianne made her move. 3 days after the garden party, a letter arrived at Blackthorn Manor. The handwriting was careful, feminine, devastated. Your Grace, I write to you with a heavy heart, compelled by conscience to reveal a truth that shames me deeply. My sister Elena has confessed to me her scheme to secure your fortune through deception. She learned of your presence at the Ashford ball through a servant and positioned herself deliberately to capture your attention. Her seeming disinterest and intelligence are performances, carefully calculated to intrigue you. She mocked you to me, calling you easily manipulated and boasting that she would be a duchess before the season ended. I cannot in good conscience allow this deception to continue. You deserve a woman of genuine character, not one who sees you merely as a means to wealth and status. I hope you will forgive me for interfering, but honor demanded I speak. With deepest regret, a friend who wishes you well. The letter was unsigned, but Adrian recognized Marianne's handwriting from the thank you note Lady Harrow had forced her to send after his first visit. He read it 3 times, his expression growing darker with each pass. Then he threw it in the fire and didn't call on Elena for 9 days. 9 days of silence that felt like drowning. Elena told herself it was expected, inevitable. Men like Adrian didn't stay interested in women like her. The fantasy had been pleasant while it lasted, but reality always won in the end. On the 10th day, she wrote him a letter, not pleading, not desperate, simply honest. Adrian, I don't know what you've heard or what you've been told, but I won't grovel or beg for your return. If you've lost interest, I understand. If someone has convinced you I'm unworthy, I cannot fight shadows. But I deserve honesty, not silence, not disappearance. If this is over, tell me. If you have doubts, speak them. I can accept rejection. I've lived with it my entire life. What I cannot accept is being dismissed without explanation, as if I were too insignificant to warrant the truth. You said I was genuine. Prove you are too. Elena. She sent it before she could change her mind. The response came within hours. Adrian's carriage appeared at Harrow House at dawn, before the household had fully woken. He demanded to see Elena immediately, ignoring the butler's protests about propriety and appropriate visiting hours. Elena met him in the library, still in her dressing gown with her hair loose, too surprised by the early hour to care about appearances. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. His coat was rumpled, his expression fierce and almost desperate. "Did you mock me?" he demanded without preamble. "Did you call me easily manipulated? Did you plan any of this?" Elena's heart sank. So someone had poisoned him against her, probably Marianne. "No," she said simply. "Someone sent me a letter claiming you confessed to exactly that." "Someone lied. Why should I believe you?" Adrian's voice was raw. "I barely know you. For all I know, everything has been performance." Elena felt something crack inside her. Not break, but crack, like ice under pressure. "You're right," she said quietly. "You don't know me. We've had 5 conversations and 3 walks. That's not enough to build trust." She met his eyes. "But I know something about you. You're afraid." Adrian froze. "What?" "You're terrified that I'm like everyone else, that I'm performing, manipulating, playing games, because if I am, Then you're back where you started, alone in a world full of beautiful liars, and that scares you more than anything. That's not— It is, Elena interrupted, and I can't fix that fear for you. I can tell you I didn't plan this, didn't scheme, didn't manipulate. I can tell you the truth until I'm breathless. But if you can't trust me, then this is already over. Adrian stared at her, something shifting in his expression. What do you want from me? He asked finally, and he sounded lost. I want you to decide, Elena said. Either you trust that what you see in me is real, or you don't. Either my word is enough, or it isn't. I won't spend my life proving myself to someone who's already decided I'm guilty. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Then Adrian moved. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her against him, his arms tight around her, his face buried in her hair. I'm sorry, he said, his voice muffled. I'm sorry. You're right. I'm terrified. But I believe you. Elena stood rigid in his embrace, shocked by the sudden intimacy, by the vulnerability in his voice. Slowly, carefully, she brought her arms up to return the embrace. The letter was from Marianne, wasn't it? She asked quietly. Probably. She'll try again. They all will. My family won't accept this without a fight. Then we fight back, Adrian said, pulling away enough to look at her face. His hands came up to frame her cheeks, his thumbs brushing her skin with unexpected gentleness. Together. You can't build a life on investigation, Elena said. Every time someone whispers a rumor, every time doubt creeps in, you can't come to me demanding proof. That's not trust. That's warfare. I know. Adrian's expression was serious, almost solemn. Which is why I need to ask you something. And I need you to answer honestly, even if you think it will hurt me. Elena nodded. Do you care about me? He asked. Or do you care about what I can give you? It was the most vulnerable she'd ever seen him, this powerful duke who commanded rooms with his presence, reduced to a man afraid of being used. I care about the way you listen when I talk, Elena said slowly. I care that you brought me philosophy books instead of jewelry. I care that you see me as a person instead of an investment or a burden. She paused. The duke part is honestly terrifying. I'd prefer you were a clerk or a solicitor, someone with less power to destroy me if this goes wrong. Adrian's laugh was surprised and genuine. A clerk? Less complicated, Elena said. Fewer people trying to sabotage us. No one writing forged letters about my character. But significantly less able to protect you when those letters are written. Adrian's expression sobered. Elena, your family will escalate. This won't stop with letters. Are you prepared for that? Are you? She countered. Because protecting me means confronting the whole system that made me invisible in the first place. The mothers who invest in beautiful daughters. The society that treats women like merchandise. The marriages built on economics instead of choice. That's not a small fight. I know. Adrian's hands were still on her face, his eyes intense. I'm ready anyway. Question is, are you ready to stop being invisible? Because I plan to make very certain that all of London sees exactly who you are. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment she could step back into safety or leap forward into the unknown. She thought about the years of hiding, of making herself small, of accepting that invisibility was easier than fighting, and she thought about how tired she was of disappearing. Then make them see me, she said. Adrian smiled, fierce and protective and absolutely certain. And Elena realized with equal parts terror and exhilaration that she'd just declared war on everything that had tried to erase her. The battle was just beginning. The war began 3 days later at Lady Pemberton's annual masquerade ball. Adrian had insisted Elena attend at his side, not hidden in corners but displayed openly as the woman he had chosen. Lady Margaret, sensing an opportunity to salvage the family's reputation, had reluctantly agreed, but only after forcing Elena into one of Marianne's cast-off gowns, a garish yellow silk that clashed horribly with Elena's complexion. You look like a canary, Marianne said with vicious satisfaction as they prepared to leave. An ugly, desperate canary. Elena ignored her, focusing instead on the mask Adrian had sent that morning, a delicate creation of silver lace and pearls that somehow made her feel beautiful despite the terrible dress. The Pemberton mansion blazed with light and music. Hundreds of London's elite gathered beneath crystal chandeliers wearing elaborate masks and false smiles. Elena felt Adrian's hand steady at the small of her back as they entered, his presence a shield against the whispers that followed them everywhere. "Remember," he murmured against her ear, "you belong here as much as anyone." But the moment they stepped into the ballroom, Elena knew something was wrong. The whispers were too loud, too deliberate. Women clustered in groups, their masked faces turning toward Elena with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. Men stared with calculating interest that made her skin crawl. Lady Pemberton descended upon them immediately, her smile sharp as a knife. "Your Grace, how delightful! And Miss Harrow!" Her eyes raked over Elena's yellow dress with barely concealed disdain. "What an interesting choice of gown, so very bold." "Lady Pemberton," Adrian said coolly, "a pleasure as always." "I must steal you away for just a moment, Your Grace. Lord Pemberton is most eager to discuss a business matter. Miss Harrow won't mind waiting, I'm sure. There are so many people here eager to make her acquaintance." The emphasis on the last word carried unmistakable menace. Adrian's hand tightened protectively. "I prefer to remain with Miss Harrow." "Oh, but I insist." Lady Pemberton's voice turned steely. "It would be terribly rude to refuse, Lord Pemberton. Surely Miss Harrow is capable of surviving a few minutes alone, unless you fear she cannot maintain proper behavior without supervision." It was a trap, elegantly constructed. Refusing would suggest Elena was incapable of navigating society independently, that Adrian had to guard her like a child. Accepting meant leaving her vulnerable to whatever attack had been orchestrated. Elena met Adrian's eyes and saw her own understanding reflected there. "I'll be fine," she said quietly. "Go." Adrian hesitated, his jaw tight with frustration. Then he leaned close and whispered, "If anyone troubles you, find Thomas Wentworth. He'll help." He squeezed her hand once before allowing Lady Pemberton to lead him away. Elena stood alone in the center of the ballroom, acutely aware of every eye tracking her movements. The first attack came within minutes. "Miss Harrow, isn't it?" A woman in an elaborate peacock mask appeared at Elena's elbow, her voice honey-sweet and poisonous. "I've been so curious to meet you. Everyone's talking about your remarkable conquest of the Duke." "Conquest seems a strong word," Elena said carefully. "Oh, but it must have required considerable strategy, mustn't it, to capture the attention of a man like that when you're so—" The woman paused delicately. "Ordinary. One wonders what methods you employed." Other women drifted closer, forming a semicircle around Elena like predators surrounding prey. "I heard she threatened to create a scandal," one murmured, loud enough to carry. "Something about compromising letters." "No, no," another corrected. "I heard she claimed to be carrying his child, forced his hand through blackmail." "Ladies," Elena said, keeping her voice level despite the fury building in her chest, "if you have accusations to make, please make them directly instead of whispering like cowards." The woman in the peacock mask laughed, a cruel, tinkling sound. "Accusations? We're simply concerned for the Duke's welfare. He's a powerful man, easily taken advantage of by cunning women who see only his fortune." "I see his character," Elena said quietly. "Perhaps that's the difference between us." Character. The word was mocking. "How noble! Though I notice you didn't refuse his courtship despite your modest background. Strange how principles disappear when faced with a duchy." Elena's hands clenched at her sides, but before she could respond, a male voice cut through the tension. "Miss Harrow, I believe you promised me this dance." Thomas Wentworth appeared like a guardian angel, his expression pleasant, but his eyes warning the circling women away. Elena seized his offered hand gratefully. "Thank you," she breathed as he led her to the floor. "They're circling like sharks," Thomas said grimly. "Someone's orchestrated this. The rumors about you have become vicious in the past few days." "What kind of rumors?" Thomas hesitated. "You don't want to know." "I need to know," he sighed. "They're saying you seduced Adrian, that you manipulated him with tears and manufactured vulnerability, that you're a fortune hunter who saw an opportunity and exploited it ruthlessly. Some are even suggesting you used physical means to compromise him. Elena's stomach turned. That's absurd. We've never been alone without a chaperone. Truth doesn't matter when the lie is more entertaining. Thomas guided her through a turn. Someone wants to destroy your reputation before Adrian can formalize his courtship. The question is who? But Elena already knew. She'd seen this kind of calculated cruelty before, refined in her own home over years of practice. Marianne. Across the ballroom, Elena spotted her sister deep in conversation with Lady Thornbury, both of them glancing repeatedly in Elena's direction. Marianne's beautiful face was animated, her expressions carefully crafted to convey concern and reluctant revelation. She was spreading the poison herself, using society's most influential gossips as her weapons. I need to leave, Elena said suddenly, before this gets worse. Running will only confirm their suspicions, Thomas warned. Staying will give Marianne more opportunities to destroy me. Elena pulled away from the dance. Please make my excuses to Adrian. Tell him I felt unwell. Elena, don't... But she was already moving, slipping through the crowd toward the terrace doors. The cool night air hit her face like a blessing as she escaped the suffocating ballroom. She leaned against the stone balustrade, trying to calm her racing heart. This was worse than she'd anticipated. She'd known society would be cruel, but she'd underestimated how thoroughly Marianne could weaponize that cruelty. Leaving so soon? The voice was male, cultured, and unfamiliar. Elena turned to find a man in a silver wolf mask watching her from the shadows. He was tall, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. I needed air, she said carefully. The ballroom was rather crowded, or rather hostile. He stepped closer, and Elena caught a whiff of expensive cologne mixed with brandy. I watched them circle you like vultures, quite the spectacle. I don't believe we've been introduced. Lord Grayson, he said, sketching a mocking bow. And you're the infamous Miss Harrow, the plain little nobody who somehow enchanted a duke. Elena's spine stiffened. If you'll excuse me, I have a proposition for you. Grayson moved to block her path. A business arrangement, if you will. I'm not interested in business arrangements with strangers. Not even one that could solve all your problems? His smile was visible even behind the mask. I know what you are, Miss Harrow, a desperate woman grasping at salvation. The Duke will tire of you eventually. Men like him always do. But I could offer you something more permanent. Elena's hand found the concealed pocket in her dress where she'd hidden a small knife, a precaution Annie had insisted upon. Move aside. Become my mistress, Grayson continued, as if she hadn't spoken. I'll set you up in a house in Chelsea, provide a generous allowance. Much better than the humiliation of being discarded by a duke once he realizes what poor value you represent. Move aside. Don't play the offended innocent. We both know what you are. He reached for her arm. You've already sold yourself to Blackthorn. Why not to someone who won't pretend it's courtship? Elena's hand closed around the knife handle, but before she could draw it, another voice cut through the darkness like a blade. Touch her, and I'll destroy everything you have. Adrian stood in the terrace doorway, his expression absolutely murderous. In the flickering lamplight, he looked less like a nobleman and more like an avenging demon. Grayson stumbled backward, his confidence evaporating. Your Grace, this isn't... Leave, Adrian said quietly. Before I forget, we're in public and beat you unconscious. Grayson fled. Adrian crossed to Elena in 3 strides, his hands gentle despite the fury still radiating from him. Did he hurt you? No, Elena's voice shook. I had a knife. I would have used it. Something that might have been pride flashed across Adrian's face. Good, but you shouldn't have had to. He turned, his jaw set. This ends tonight. Adrian, what are you... But he was already striding back into the ballroom, pulling Elena with him. The orchestra faltered as he walked directly to the center of the floor, commanding attention without saying a word. The room fell silent. Ladies and gentlemen, Adrian said, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast space, I have an announcement. Elena's heart hammered. This was madness. Whatever he was about to do would either save her or destroy them both. There have been rumors circulating about Miss Elena Harrow, Adrian continued. Vicious, unfounded rumors designed to damage her reputation. I want to address them directly. Lady Margaret had gone pale. Marianne looked terrified. Miss Harrow did not manipulate me, Adrian said flatly. She did not seduce me. She did not compromise me or blackmail me or employ any of the other creative theories this room has apparently generated. He paused, his eyes sweeping the crowd with contempt. She simply existed as herself, honest, intelligent, and genuine, and I chose her. That choice offends you because it exposes the fundamental corruption of your system. Gasps rippled through the crowd. You judge women by their beauty and measure their worth in dowries, Adrian continued relentlessly. You treat marriage as commerce and daughters as merchandise. Miss Harrow's crime is refusing to participate in that grotesque marketplace. She doesn't perform. She doesn't pretend. She simply is. And you hate her for it because her honesty makes your lies visible. Your Grace, Lady Pemberton interrupted, her voice shrill. This is highly inappropriate. What's inappropriate? Adrian said coldly. Is Lord Grayson propositioning my intended on your terrace while you orchestrated attacks on her character in your ballroom? The room erupted in scandalized whispers. Your intended? Lady Margaret's voice cut through the chaos. She looked between Adrian and Elena, her expression calculating. Your Grace, surely you don't mean... I mean exactly that. Adrian turned to Elena, and his expression softened into something that looked almost vulnerable. I had planned to do this privately, but circumstances have forced my hand. He dropped to one knee in the center of the Pemberton ballroom, in front of 500 of London's most powerful people, and pulled a small velvet box from his coat. Elena's breath stopped. Elena Harrow, Adrian said quietly, will you marry me? The world seemed to tilt sideways. This wasn't how proposals happened, not in public, not as declarations of war, not to women like her. Adrian, she whispered, you don't have to do this. I know. His eyes held hers. I want to. I'm tired of playing by their rules. I'm tired of watching them tear you apart. I'm choosing you, publicly and permanently. The question is whether you're willing to choose me back. Elena looked at this man kneeling before her, powerful, proud, and somehow made vulnerable by the simple act of asking instead of demanding. Then she looked at the crowd surrounding them, at her mother's horrified face, at Marianne's devastated expression, at the women who had circled her like predators an hour ago, now watching with shock and envy. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous, that accepting would paint a target on her back that would never fade, that marrying into this level of power and scrutiny would mean fighting battles for the rest of her life. But she was tired of being invisible, tired of being erased. Yes, she said. The ballroom exploded. Adrian stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, a massive sapphire surrounded by diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. Then he pulled her close and kissed her, breaking every rule of propriety in a single bold gesture. When he finally released her, his smile was fierce and triumphant. Now, they can't ignore you, he murmured against her ear. He was right, but he'd also just ensured they would never forgive her either. The carriage ride back to Harrow House was silent as death. Lady Margaret sat rigid, her face an expressionless mask. Marianne stared out the window, tears streaming down her beautiful face. Catherine looked between them all, terrified of the storm she knew was coming. Elena twisted the engagement ring on her finger, the weight of it both thrilling and terrifying. She'd just agreed to marry a duke. In 3 months, she would be one of the most powerful women in England, if she survived that long. The moment they entered Harrow House, Lady Margaret's control shattered. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she screamed, her voice echoing through the foyer. "The scandal you've created? The damage to this family's reputation?" "I got engaged," Elena said calmly. "Most families would consider that a triumph." "To a duke who humiliated us in front of everyone," Lady Margaret was shaking with rage. "He accused me of corruption, called our values grotesque. He's made us a laughingstock." "He told the truth," Elena corrected. "That's not the same thing." Marianne stepped forward, her beautiful face ugly with hatred. "You've ruined everything, everything I worked for, everything I deserved." "You deserved nothing," Elena said quietly. "You're beautiful, Marianne, but that doesn't entitle you to people. Adrian made his own choice." "Because you poisoned him against me!" Marianne shrieked. You told him lies, made me look shallow and cruel." "You are shallow and cruel," Elena interrupted. "I didn't have to tell him anything. He saw it himself." Marianne lunged. She moved so fast that Elena barely had time to react before her sister's hands were in her hair, yanking viciously. They crashed into a side table, sending a vase shattering across the floor. "You bitch!" Marianne screamed, clawing at Elena's face. "You ugly, jealous bitch!" Elena fought back, years of suppressed rage finally exploding. She shoved Marianne hard, sending her sister stumbling backward into Catherine. "Enough!" Lord Harrow's voice boomed through the foyer. He stood at the top of the stairs, his expression thunderous. "All of you, in my study, now!" They assembled in the dark-paneled study like prisoners awaiting sentencing. Lord Harrow paced behind his desk, his face grim. "The Duke has made his choice," he said finally. "Elena will marry him, and this family will benefit from the connection. That is the end of the discussion." "But father," Marianne started. "Silence." Lord Harrow's voice was cold. "You had your chance, Marianne. Multiple chances. You failed to secure his interest. Elena succeeded. That's how this world works." "So she's rewarded for manipulation?" Lady Margaret demanded. "She's rewarded for being what the Duke wanted," Lord Harrow corrected. "Something none of you understood. He didn't want performance. He wanted authenticity." He turned to Elena. "I've made mistakes with you. Listened too much to your mother's advice about where to invest our resources. But you've secured this family's future. For that, you have my gratitude." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't love. But it was the first time Lord Harrow had acknowledged Elena as valuable. The victory tasted hollow. "The engagement will proceed," Lord Harrow continued. "We'll announce it properly in the Times tomorrow. Lady Margaret, you will plan a wedding befitting a duchess. Marianne, Catherine, you will support your sister publicly, regardless of your private feelings. Any hint of family discord will damage all our prospects." "You can't be serious," Marianne whispered. "I'm completely serious," Lord Harrow said. "Sabotage Elena's engagement, and I will cut you off entirely. No dowry, no support, nothing. You'll marry whoever will take you with empty pockets." The threat landed like a physical blow. Marianne's face went white. "Now get out," Lord Harrow said tiredly. "All of you." Elena climbed the stairs to her small bedroom, her body aching from the fight with Marianne, her mind reeling from everything that had happened. She was engaged to a duke. In 3 months, she would leave this house forever. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it brought a wave of terror so intense she had to sit down on her narrow bed to catch her breath, because Adrian had just made her the most visible woman in London, and visibility, Elena knew, made you a target. The proof arrived 2 days later. Elena was in the garden reading when Annie came running, her face pale with fear. Miss Elena, you need to come quickly." Elena followed her inside to find the drawing room filled with smoke. Someone had thrown a brick through the window, wrapped in paper that was now burning on the carpet. Lord Harrow beat out the flames while Lady Margaret stood frozen, staring at the message scrawled on the brick in crude letters. "Fortune hunter. Whore. You don't belong." Elena's hands went numb. "Who did this?" Lord Harrow demanded. "I don't know, sir," the butler said shakily. "I saw a figure running from the garden, but they were masked." Elena picked up the brick with trembling hands, staring at the ugly words. This wasn't Marianne's elegant cruelty. This was something darker, raw hatred from strangers who'd decided Elena's rise threatened their world order. "We need to inform the Duke," Lady Margaret said, for once looking genuinely frightened. "No." Elena's voice was firm despite her shaking hands. "This is exactly what they want, to make me seem weak, vulnerable, to make Adrian question whether I'm worth the trouble. But Elena, I said no." She dropped the brick and straightened her spine. "If I run to Adrian every time someone attacks me, I prove them right. I prove I need constant protection. I won't do that." She walked out of the drawing room with her head high, but once she reached her bedroom, she collapsed against the door, her heart hammering. Someone hated her enough to commit violence, and that someone knew where she lived. The attacks escalated over the next week. Anonymous letters arrived daily, filled with threats and obscenities. Someone spread a rumor that Elena had been seen entering a brothel. A political cartoon appeared in a newspaper showing a grotesque caricature of Elena climbing over beautiful women to reach a duke-shaped prize. Adrian wanted to respond with legal action, with investigations, with public denunciations. But Elena stopped him each time. "Fighting them makes it worse," she said. "It proves we're affected. We need to rise above it." "I don't want to rise above it," Adrian growled. "I want to destroy everyone who's hurt you." "Violence won't change their minds. It will only confirm I'm not strong enough to survive this world without your protection." Adrian looked at her with something like awe. "You're braver than I am." "I'm more desperate," Elena corrected. "I have more to lose." But desperation had limits. The breaking point came at the final social event before the wedding, a garden party hosted by the Queen's cousin, attended by everyone who mattered in English society. Elena wore a new dress, finally, a gown Adrian had commissioned specifically for her, deep blue silk that made her look almost regal. She stood at his side, her head high despite the whispers that followed them everywhere. Then Lord Grayson appeared. He was drunk, his eyes glassy with alcohol and malice. He stumbled toward them across the manicured lawn, his voice carrying across the previously polite conversations. "There she is," he announced, "the fortune hunter herself. Tell me, Miss Harrow, how does it feel to spread your legs for a title?" The garden went absolutely silent. Adrian moved like lightning, his fist connecting with Grayson's jaw with a crack that echoed across the lawn. Grayson crumpled to the ground, blood streaming from his mouth. "You're finished," Adrian said quietly, standing over him. "Socially, financially, politically. I will destroy everything you have." But the damage was done. The Queen's cousin, a severe woman named Lady Rothschild, approached with ice in her expression. "Your Grace," she said coldly, "I'm afraid I must ask you to leave. This kind of violence has no place at a civilized gathering." "Grayson," Adrian started. "Will also be asked to leave," Lady Rothschild interrupted. "But you struck him. That is unacceptable, regardless of provocation." Elena felt everything crumbling. This was it, the moment where even Adrian's power couldn't protect them from the consequences of breaking society's rules. "It was my fault," she said quietly. Everyone turned to stare at her. "No," Adrian started, but Elena squeezed his hand, silencing him. "Lord Grayson insulted me because I exist in a space society believes I don't deserve," Elena continued, her voice steady despite her terror. "The Duke defended me because he refuses to watch the woman he loves be degraded. If that makes us unsuitable for civilized gathering, then perhaps your civilization needs examination." Lady Rothschild's expression didn't change. "Pretty words, Miss Harrow, but the fact remains—" "The fact remains," a new voice interrupted, "that Lord Grayson is a known degenerate who has propositioned half the unmarried women in this garden." Thomas Wentworth stepped forward, flanked by 3 other men Elena vaguely recognized from various balls. "We saw him approach Miss Harrow," Thomas continued. "Saw him speak to her in terms that would make a soldier blush. The Duke showed remarkable restraint in only hitting him once." "I would have shot him," one of the other men agreed. Lady Rothschild looked between them, clearly calculating. 4 respected gentlemen publicly defending Elena and Adrian against one known troublemaker. "Nevertheless," she said finally, "I think it best if this party concludes early. Too much excitement for one afternoon." It was a dismissal, but not a condemnation. Elena realized with shock that they'd won, barely, but won nonetheless. As they left, Adrian pulled her close. "You didn't have to do that," he murmured. "Take blame for my actions." "Yes, I did," Elena said, "because if I hadn't spoken, they would have seen me as a victim who needed rescue. Now they saw me as someone capable of defending herself." She paused. "Even if I'm terrified inside." "You hide it well." "I've had practice." That night, alone in her bedroom, Elena finally allowed herself to break down. She'd survived another assault, another test, another attempt to prove she didn't belong. But the wedding was still 2 weeks away. And Elena had learned enough about London society to know the worst attacks always came right before victory, because if they couldn't prevent her rise, they would try to destroy her at the moment of triumph. The warning came from an unexpected source, 3 days before the wedding, Catherine appeared at Elena's door late at night, her face pale and frightened. "I need to tell you something," she whispered, "but you have to promise not to tell Mother I warned you." Elena pulled her inside. "What is it?" "Marianne has been meeting with someone," Catherine said, her voice shaking. "A man. I don't know his name, but I've seen them together twice now, talking in secret. She's planning something, Elena. Something terrible. She said if she can't have the Duke, she'll make sure you can't either." Elena's blood ran cold. "What kind of something?" "I don't know, but she's desperate. And desperate people do horrible things." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "I know I've been cruel to you. I know I've helped Mother tear you down. But I don't want you dead." "Dead?" "She talked about accidents," Catherine whispered. "About how tragic it would be if something happened to you before the wedding. About how the Duke would be free to choose someone more suitable." Elena's mind raced. Marianne was plotting murder. Her own sister was considering killing her rather than accepting defeat. "Why are you telling me this?" Elena asked. Catherine looked away. "Because I'm tired of being afraid of her. Tired of letting Mother turn us into monsters. You stood up to them. Maybe it's time I did too." Elena pulled her sister into a sudden, fierce embrace. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Catherine said. Just stay alive long enough to marry him. After that, you'll be protected. But these next 3 days..." She pulled back, her expression grim. "Watch your back, Elena. Don't trust anyone. Not even family." "Especially not family," Elena murmured. After Catherine left, Elena sat in the darkness, her mind whirling. She could tell Adrian. He would increase security, surround her with guards, lock her away until the wedding, but that would prove every horrible thing they'd said about her, that she was weak, that she needed constant protection, that she couldn't survive without a Duke's power shielding her. Or she could do what she'd always done, survive on her own terms. Elena walked to her desk and began writing letters, not to Adrian, not to ask for help, but to every person who'd shown her even the smallest kindness over the years. Thomas Wentworth, Annie the maid, the librarian at the lending library who'd saved books for her, even the cook who'd sometimes given her extra food when Lady Margaret put her on restricted meals. She was building her own army, because if Marianne wanted a war, Elena would give her one. But it would be fought on Elena's terms, using Elena's weapons, intelligence, strategy, and the network of people society had taught her to see. The invisible ones who actually ran the world while nobles played their games. The wedding was in 3 days, and Elena Harrow was done being prey. The first person to respond was Thomas Wentworth. He arrived at Harrow House at dawn the next morning, his face grim but determined. Elena met him in the garden, away from the house's listening ears and watching eyes. "Your letter said you needed help," Thomas said without preamble. "What kind of trouble are we talking about?" Elena handed him Catherine's warning, written out in precise detail. Thomas read it twice, his expression darkening with each pass. "She's planning to kill you," he said flatly. "Your own sister." "She's planning to try," Elena corrected. "The question is whether we can stop her without creating the kind of scandal that would destroy the wedding anyway." Thomas folded the letter carefully. "What do you need?" "Eyes," Elena said. "People Marianne won't notice watching her. Servants, shopkeepers, anyone who exists in the background the way I used to. I need to know who she's meeting with and what she's planning before she can execute it." "That's dangerous. If she realizes you're investigating, then I'll deal with it," Elena interrupted. "I'm done being passive, Thomas. I'm done waiting for someone else to save me. Either I survive this on my own terms, or I don't survive at all." Thomas studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I know a few people. Former soldiers, mostly. Men who owe me favors. They're good at being invisible when needed." "Perfect." Elena pulled out a small purse of coins, money she'd saved over years from the meager allowance Lady Margaret occasionally deigned to give her. "This is all I have. Use it to pay them." "Keep your money," Thomas said, waving it away. "These men don't do it for coin. They do it because they hate bullies." He paused. "And because I'm going to tell them about a woman who's been bullied her entire life finally fighting back. That's the kind of story that makes soldiers nostalgic." Elena felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're safely married and Marianne's locked up for attempted murder." Thomas tipped his hat. "I'll have news for you by tonight." He was true to his word. That evening, Annie brought Elena a folded note hidden in a tea napkin. The message was brief but damning. "Your sister met with a man named Marcus Vane at the Black Swan Tavern. Former apothecary, dismissed for selling poison. They argued over price. She wanted something untraceable. He said it would cost £50. She agreed. Meeting again tomorrow night to complete the transaction." Elena's hand shook as she burned the note in her bedroom fireplace. Poison. Marianne had chosen poison. It made terrible sense. A dose in Elena's tea, a sudden illness, death before the wedding. Tragic but not obviously murder. And Marianne would be there to comfort the devastated Duke, offering herself as a replacement bride while the family was still in mourning. It was almost elegant in its cruelty. Elena sat on her bed, staring at the flames consuming Thomas's note, and made a decision that would either save her or condemn her. She was going to that meeting tomorrow night. Not to stop it. That would only drive Marianne to try something else. Something Elena couldn't anticipate. No. Elena was going to let Marianne buy the poison. And then she was going to use it to destroy her sister completely. The next evening, Elena pleaded a headache and retired early. Lady Margaret barely noticed, too busy obsessing over wedding preparations. Marianne looked almost sympathetic, probably calculating how much longer she had to pretend concern before Elena conveniently died. Elena waited until the household settled into sleep, then slipped out through the servants' entrance wearing a dark cloak borrowed from Annie. A hired carriage waited 2 streets away, driven by one of Thomas's soldier friends, a grim man named Bennett, who asked no questions and offered no judgments. "The Black Swan," Elena said quietly. Bennett grunted acknowledgement and guided the horses into London's dark streets. The tavern squatted in a rough neighborhood where gaslight barely penetrated the fog. Elena watched from the carriage as Marianne arrived in a hired cab, her beautiful face hidden beneath a heavy veil. She moved quickly inside, glancing around nervously. "Stay here," Elena told Bennett. "If I'm not out in 20 minutes, go to this address." She handed him a card with Adrian's direction. "Tell the Duke everything." Bennett's expression suggested he thought this was a terrible plan, but he nodded. Elena slipped from the carriage and circled to the tavern's back entrance. Thomas's intelligence had been thorough. There was a storage room with a thin wall adjacent to the private room where Marianne was meeting Vane. Elena could hear every word through the cracked plaster. "You're certain it's undetectable?" Marianne's voice was tight with nervous energy. "Completely," a male voice responded, Vane, presumably. "Symptoms mimic natural illness, fever, weakness, respiratory failure. The physicians will call it pneumonia or consumption. No one will question it." "How long?" "Administered at breakfast, death by evening, quick enough to seem acute but slow enough to avoid suspicion." Elena pressed her ear closer to the wall, her heart hammering. She needed Marianne to incriminate herself completely, to say something that couldn't be explained away as theoretical discussion. "And you're certain it will work?" Marianne asked. "I can't afford mistakes. If she survives—" "She won't," Vane interrupted. "This dose would kill a horse. Your sister doesn't stand a chance." "Good." Marianne's voice turned vicious. "She deserves to suffer, stealing what should have been mine, making a fool of me in front of everyone. I want her to know, in those final hours, that I won, that I took everything from her." £50, Vane said, as agreed. Elena heard the rustle of money changing hands, then Vane's voice again. "Pleasure doing business. Though I'd recommend administering it soon. This particular compound degrades after a week." "Tomorrow morning," Marianne said with grim satisfaction. "At breakfast. I'll pour it into her tea myself." Elena had heard enough. She slipped back outside and returned to the carriage, her mind racing. She had Marianne's confession, witnessed by Vane, who could be pressured to testify. But simply exposing Marianne would create exactly the scandal Elena needed to avoid. A sensational trial, accusations flying, the wedding potentially postponed or cancelled while London society gorged itself on the drama. No, Elena needed something cleaner, more surgical. "Take me to Blackthorn Manor," she told Bennett. Adrian's butler tried to refuse her entry. It was nearly midnight, completely inappropriate for an unmarried woman to call on a duke. but Elena pushed past him into the entrance hall and demanded Adrian be summoned immediately. He appeared within minutes, hastily dressed, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm when he saw her face. What happened? He pulled her into his study, closing the door firmly. Are you hurt? No, but I will be if we don't act quickly. Elena laid out everything. Catherine's warning, Thomas's investigation, Marianne's meeting with Vane, the poison purchased for tomorrow's breakfast. Adrian's expression went from concerned to murderous. That's attempted murder. We call the police immediately. Have her arrested. No, Elena said firmly. That creates a spectacle, a trial, testimony. My entire family dragged through the courts. Even if Marianne's convicted, the scandal would destroy any chance of me being accepted as your Duchess. Society would always whisper that I came from a family of murderers. I don't care what society whispers. I do. Elena met his eyes. Because if I can't function as your Duchess, if society refuses to accept me, then Marianne wins anyway. She destroys my future even from a prison cell. Adrian's jaw clenched with frustration. Then what do you propose? Let her poison you? No, I propose we turn her weapon against her. Elena pulled out a small vial from her pocket, laudanum she'd purchased from a legitimate apothecary that afternoon. Tomorrow morning, Marianne will try to poison my tea, but I'll switch our cups. She'll drink the poison meant for me. That's murder, Adrian said flatly. That's justice, Elena corrected. She bought poison with the intention to kill. If she dies from her own weapon, that's consequence, not crime. The law won't see it that way. The law won't know. Elena's voice was steady despite her racing heart. I'll add this laudanum to my own tea. When Marianne drinks from what she thinks is my cup, she'll simply fall asleep, deeply but harmlessly. While she's unconscious, you'll have your physician examine her. He'll find the poison Vane sold her still in her possession. We'll have evidence of her intent without needing a dramatic arrest. Adrian stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. You've thought this through. I've thought of nothing else since Catherine warned me. Elena's hands trembled slightly, but her voice stayed firm. I can't keep living in fear, waiting for the next attack. I need to end this, permanently. And what happens to Marianne after, when she wakes up and realizes her plan failed? Elena's smile was cold. Then you give her a choice. Confess to attempting murder and face trial, or accept immediate exile to your estate in Scotland with no money, no prospects, and no chance of ever returning to London. Let her disappear the way she tried to make me disappear. Adrian was silent for a long moment, studying her face. Then he crossed to his desk and pulled out paper and ink. If we're doing this, we're doing it carefully, he said. I'm writing to my solicitor and my physician right now. We'll need witnesses we trust, documentation of every step. And the moment Marianne drinks that tea, you're under my protection until the wedding. No more sleeping at Harrow House where she could try something else. Adrian, that's non-negotiable, he interrupted. You've planned how to neutralize Marianne's attack. Let me plan how to keep you safe afterward. His expression softened slightly. Please, let me protect you in this one thing. Elena nodded slowly. All right. They worked through the night, planning every detail with the precision of a military campaign. Adrian's physician, a discreet man named Dr. Morrison, arrived at 3 in the morning and listened to Elena's story without judgment. His contribution was simple but vital. He would attend breakfast at Harrow House under the pretense of ensuring Elena was healthy for the wedding. When Marianne collapsed, he would discover the poison and document everything for potential legal proceedings. Thomas arrived at dawn with 2 of his soldier friends, who would position themselves outside Harrow House to ensure Marianne couldn't flee if things went wrong. By the time the sun rose, Elena had an army. She returned to Harrow House just as the household was waking, slipping back into her room through the servants' entrance. Annie helped her change into fresh clothes, her hands shaking. Miss, are you certain about this? Annie whispered. What if something goes wrong? Then I'll die knowing I fought back, Elena said quietly. But I don't plan on dying today. Breakfast at Harrow House was normally a silent, tense affair. Lady Margaret read correspondence while picking at toast. Lord Harrow hid behind the newspaper. Marianne and Catherine ate in careful silence, avoiding each other's eyes. But this morning, Lady Margaret was almost cheerful. "Only 2 more days until the wedding," she announced. "Elena, you must eat properly. We can't have you looking peaked in your wedding gown." Elena forced herself to smile. "Of course, Mother." She took her usual seat, acutely aware of Marianne sitting across from her. Her sister looked composed, but there was tension in her shoulders, a tightness around her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept. The tea arrived. Elena watched Marianne's hands as the maid poured, saw the almost imperceptible shift in her sister's posture as she calculated angles and timing. Lady Margaret was still reading letters. Lord Harrow was absorbed in an article about railroad investments. Catherine stared at her plate, knowing what was about to happen, but too afraid to intervene. "More tea, Miss Elena?" the maid asked. "Please," Elena said calmly. Marianne stood suddenly. "I'll get it for you, sister to sister." Her smile was saccharine sweet. "After all, these are our last few days together as family." She crossed to Elena's side, taking the teapot from the confused maid. Elena watched as Marianne poured with exaggerated care, her hand positioned to shield the cup from view. That was when she added the poison. Elena saw the subtle movement, the quick flick of Marianne's wrist as she transferred something from her palm into the tea. It was smoothly done, practiced. Marianne had clearly rehearsed this moment. "There," Marianne said, setting the cup before Elena with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Drink up, you need your strength." "Thank you," Elena said quietly. Then, "Actually, Marianne, would you mind terribly switching seats with me? The sun is in my eyes from this angle." Marianne's smile faltered. "What? No, I'm perfectly comfortable here." "Please," Elena insisted, standing and gathering her things. "Just for this morning. You don't mind, do you?" It was a simple request, impossible to refuse without seeming petty. Marianne had no choice but to agree, moving to Elena's former seat while Elena settled into Marianne's chair, and placed Marianne's teacup, the unpoisoned one, in front of herself. While Marianne stared at the poisoned cup now sitting before her, Elena had already added the laudanum to what was now Marianne's cup before standing. Her sister had no way of knowing which cup contained what. "Aren't you going to drink your tea?" Elena asked innocently. "It's getting cold." Marianne stared at the cup like it was a serpent. She couldn't refuse to drink. That would raise suspicions. But she couldn't be certain whether she was looking at the poisoned cup or the safe one. "I'm not thirsty," she said finally. "Don't be silly," Lady Margaret said without looking up. "You specifically poured it for yourself. Drink." A knock at the door interrupted the tense moment. The butler entered with an apologetic expression. "I apologize for the interruption, but Dr. Morrison is here. His Grace sent him to ensure Miss Elena is in good health before the wedding." Adrian's physician entered with his medical bag, his expression professionally neutral. "Good morning, Lady Harrow. I hope I'm not intruding. The Duke is rather anxious about his bride's health given all the excitement of late." "Not at all," Lady Margaret said, clearly pleased by the attention. "How thoughtful of His Grace. Elena, go with the doctor." "Actually," Dr. Morrison said smoothly, "I'd prefer to conduct a brief examination here, with family present. Just a formality to check her general condition. Won't take but a moment." He moved to Elena's side, taking her wrist to check her pulse while his eyes scanned the table. His gaze lingered on the 2 teacups, then flicked to Elena's face. She gave him the smallest nod. Dr. Morrison understood. "Miss Elena appears perfectly healthy," he announced, "though I notice you haven't touched your breakfast. You really should eat something." "I was just having tea," Elena said calmly. She lifted her cup, Marianne's original unpoisoned cup, and took a sip. "See? Perfectly fine." Marianne's face had gone white. She was staring at her own cup, the one with poison and laudanum, with dawning horror. "Miss Marianne," Dr. Morrison said pleasantly, "you also look a bit peaked. Have you been sleeping well?" "I'm fine," Marianne said through clenched teeth. "Perhaps some tea would help settle your nerves," Lady Margaret suggested. "You've barely touched yours." The trap was closing. If Marianne refused to drink, it would raise questions. If she drank, she would consume poison she'd intended for Elena, though thanks to the laudanum, she would only fall asleep instead of dying. Either way, her plan was ruined. Marianne's hand shook as she reached for the cup. She brought it to her lips, hesitated, then set it down again. Actually, I feel quite ill, she said abruptly, standing. I need to lie down. She practically ran from the room. Dr. Morrison caught Elena's eye and nodded slightly. He would follow Marianne, ensure she didn't try to dispose of the poison or flee. Thomas's men were outside if she attempted to run. The trap had been sprung. Elena finished her breakfast calmly while Lady Margaret complained about Marianne's dramatics, and Lord Harrow discussed wedding logistics. She played the role of unconcerned bride perfectly, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. An hour later, Dr. Morrison returned with grim news delivered in Lady Margaret's private sitting room. I'm afraid I have a disturbing discovery to report, he said formally. While examining Miss Marianne, who fainted in her room, I found this in her possession. He held up a small vial of clear liquid. What is it? Lady Margaret asked, confused. Poison, Dr. Morrison said flatly. A lethal compound typically used to eliminate rat. I've sent for the authorities to verify its composition, but I'm quite certain of its nature. The room went silent. That's impossible, Lady Margaret whispered. Marianne she would never. I'm afraid the evidence suggests otherwise, Dr. Morrison continued. This particular poison was purchased from a known dealer just last night. The transaction has been documented. Lord Harrow's face had gone dangerously pale. You're saying my daughter bought poison? I'm saying she possessed it, Dr. Morrison corrected carefully. The question is why? Elena stood, her legs shaking but her voice steady. I think we all know why. She intended it for me. Don't be ridiculous, Lady Margaret snapped, but there was fear in her eyes now. Marianne loves you. She would never— She hates me, Elena interrupted quietly. She's hated me since the Duke chose me over her, and rather than accept it, she decided to eliminate me and take my place. That's a serious accusation, Lord Harrow said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was calculating now. Elena could see it, weighing the scandal of Marianne's arrest against the damage of covering it up. It's the truth, Elena said. Ask her yourself when she wakes, or don't. Either way, I'm leaving this house today. I'll stay at Blackthorn Manor until the wedding, and Marianne— She paused, choosing her words carefully. Marianne should probably go somewhere to recover from her illness, somewhere far from London, for her health. The meaning was clear: exile or exposure. Those were the only options. Lord Harrow closed his eyes. I'll make arrangements. By evening, Marianne was on a coach heading to Adrian's estate in Scotland, accompanied by a nurse and a guard. She had woken from the laudanum-induced sleep to find the poison documented, the evidence secured, and her fate decided. Lord Harrow had given her the choice: exile with a small allowance and her silence, or trial for attempted murder. She had chosen exile. Catherine had stood in Elena's doorway as Elena packed her belongings, tears streaming down her face. I should have done more, Catherine whispered. Should have stopped her earlier, told someone. You warned me, Elena said gently. That took courage. More than you think. Will you forgive me for everything before? Elena looked at her sister, genuinely looked at her, for the first time in years. Catherine wasn't beautiful like Marianne or clever like Elena herself. She was simply ordinary, caught between a brilliant mother's ambitions and her own desperate need for approval. Yes, Elena said quietly, but you have to forgive yourself too. Stop letting Mother tell you who to be. Catherine nodded, wiping her eyes. Will I see you? After the wedding? If you want to, Elena said, on your own terms, not Mother's. The reconciliation was small, imperfect, but real. Elena left Harrow House that night with only 2 trunks and Annie by her side. Adrian had offered to hire her as Elena's lady's maid, and the girl had accepted with tearful gratitude. Blackthorn Manor was massive, intimidating, and somehow immediately felt more like home than Harrow House ever had. Adrian met her at the entrance, pulling her into an embrace that spoke of relief and residual fear. It's over, he murmured against her hair. You're safe. We're safe, Elena corrected. She can't hurt us now. That night, sitting in Adrian's library surrounded by more books than she'd ever seen in one place, Elena finally allowed herself to believe it. She had survived. Not through beauty or charm or playing the game society demanded, but through intelligence, strategy, and the courage to fight back when everyone expected her to simply accept destruction. The wedding was tomorrow, but tonight, Elena Harrow was already transformed. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, as if even the London weather was cooperating with Elena's extraordinary day. She woke in a guest room at Blackthorn Manor that was larger than the entire second floor of Harrow House. Annie had already laid out the wedding gown, a creation of ivory silk and Brussels lace that Adrian had commissioned from the finest dressmaker in London. "You look like a princess," Annie breathed as she helped Elena into the gown. "I look like myself," Elena corrected gently, "just in much better clothing." The ceremony would take place at St. George's Chapel, the same church where royalty married. Adrian had spared no expense, extending invitations to every important family in England. It was a calculated move. Make the wedding so grand, so public, so undeniably magnificent that no one could question Elena's legitimacy as Duchess. As her carriage approached the chapel, Elena saw the crowds. Hundreds of people lined the streets, curious to see the plain daughter who had somehow captured a duke. The whispers had evolved over the past weeks from mockery to grudging fascination. She was no longer invisible. Thomas Wentworth waited at the chapel entrance, offering his arm to escort her inside since Lord Harrow had refused to attend, too ashamed by Marianne's exile to face society. "Ready to shock them all one final time?" Thomas asked with a slight smile. "I've been shocking them for weeks," Elena replied. "What's one more day?" The chapel was packed, every pew filled with nobility, their faces a mixture of curiosity, envy, and calculation. Elena walked down the aisle on Thomas's arm, her head high, refusing to look down or away from their stares. She had spent too many years being invisible to hide now. Adrian waited at the altar in formal attire that made him look even more imposing than usual. But when he saw Elena approaching, his expression softened into something that looked almost like wonder. "You're beautiful," he whispered as she reached him. "I'm the same person I was yesterday," Elena replied. "Exactly," Adrian said. "That's why you're beautiful." The ceremony passed in a blur of words and vows, and the weight of the ring Adrian slipped onto her finger, a band of gold set with sapphires that matched her engagement ring. When the priest pronounced them married, Adrian kissed her with a tenderness that belied his fearsome reputation. The crowd erupted in applause. The reception was held at Blackthorn Manor, transformed into a glittering spectacle of flowers and music and enough food to feed half of London. Elena stood at Adrian's side, greeting guests with practiced courtesy, accepting their congratulations with grace. Many of the same people who had whispered cruel rumors about her now smiled and complimented her dress, her composure, her unexpected rise. Elena accepted their falseness with equanimity. She understood now how this world worked. They didn't need to like her. They just needed to accept that Adrian had chosen her, and that choice was permanent. Lady Pemberton approached with a stiff smile. "Your Grace, what a lovely wedding. Quite the triumph." Elena smiled back just as falsely. "Thank you, Lady Pemberton. Your ball was instrumental in bringing us together. I'll always remember it." The threat was subtle, but clear. Elena remembered exactly who had tried to destroy her and who had helped. Lady Pemberton paled slightly and moved away. Thomas found her during the dancing, offering his arm for a waltz. "You did it," he said quietly as they moved across the floor. "Actually did it. The invisible daughter became a duchess." "I'm still the same person," Elena said. "No," Thomas corrected gently. "You're who you always were, finally allowed to be visible. That's different." As the evening progressed, Elena noticed Catherine standing alone near the refreshment table, looking lost and uncomfortable. Elena excused herself from a conversation with a countess and crossed to her sister. "You came," she said quietly. Catherine's eyes were red-rimmed. "Mother didn't want me to. Said it would be disloyal after everything with Marianne. But I wanted to see you happy." "Dance with me," Elena said suddenly. "What?" "Dance with me. Show everyone that we're still sisters, that I haven't forgotten my family." Elena held out her hand. "Unless you'd prefer to keep hiding in corners." Catherine's laugh was watery but genuine. "I think one of us hiding was enough." They danced together, two sisters who had been enemies, now tentatively building something new. The crowd watched with fascination, whispering about forgiveness and family bonds. Elena didn't care what they whispered anymore. As the evening drew to a close, Adrian found her standing alone on a balcony overlooking the gardens, stealing a moment of peace from the overwhelming celebration. "Tired?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Exhausted," she admitted, "but happy. Is that strange?" "Not at all." Adrian rested his chin on her shoulder. "I have something for you, a wedding gift." "You've already given me everything," Elena protested. "Not quite." He took her hand and led her through the manor to a wing she hadn't yet explored. He opened a door to reveal a library, not the formal one where he conducted business, but a smaller, more intimate space. Every wall was lined with shelves. Every shelf was filled with books. "I've been collecting them for 3 years," Adrian said quietly. "Every book you mentioned wanting to read that day in the park, and every day since. Philosophy, history, poetry, science. I had agents scouring London for first editions, rare volumes, anything I thought you'd love." Elena's eyes filled with tears as she walked the room, seeing titles she'd only dreamed of owning. Rousseau's complete works, banned political treatises, scientific journals from across Europe, books written by women that polite society pretended didn't exist. "This is—" She couldn't find words. "Yours," Adrian finished. "All of it. Your sanctuary. The place where you can be exactly who you are without performance or pretense." Elena turned to face him, this powerful man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had fought for her when the world tried to erase her, who understood that the greatest gift wasn't wealth or status, but simply the freedom to exist authentically. "I love you," she said, and meant it with her entire heart. Adrian pulled her close, his kiss deep and claiming. "I love you too. My brilliant, brave, absolutely extraordinary wife." Later that night, as the guests finally departed and Blackthorn Manor settled into quiet, Elena stood at the window of her new bedroom, a suite 3 times the size of her former room at Harrow House, with views of gardens instead of alleys. She was a duchess now, one of the most powerful women in England, but more importantly, she was seen. The invisible daughter had become impossible to ignore. And tomorrow, Elena would begin the real work, using her new position to protect other invisible women, to challenge the system that had tried to erase her, to prove that worth wasn't measured in beauty or dowries, but in intelligence, courage, and the strength to survive. The war wasn't over, but Elena had won the first battle, and she was just getting started. The real work began the morning after the wedding. Elena woke in her new bed, massive, luxurious, and decidedly empty. Adrian had already risen, his side of the mattress still warm but vacant. She found a note on his pillow, written in his precise handwriting. "Parliament session this morning. Didn't want to wake you. The library is yours whenever you want it. Everything else in this house is also yours, including me." Elena smiled despite herself, then rose and rang for Annie. Within the hour, she was dressed in a deep green day gown that actually fit her properly, her hair arranged in a style that made her look dignified rather than severe. She descended the grand staircase of Blackthorn Manor as its duchess for the first time, and found the household staff assembled in the entrance hall waiting for her. The head butler, a stern man named Harrison, who'd served Adrian's family for 40 years, stepped forward and bowed formally. "Your Grace," he said, his voice carrying to every servant present, "on behalf of the entire household, we welcome you as mistress of Blackthorn Manor. We await your instructions." It was a test, Elena realized. The servants were wondering what kind of duchess she would be, imperious like so many noblewomen, or something different. Elena looked at the faces before her. Maids and footmen, cooks and gardeners, stable boys and housekeepers. The invisible people who actually ran the great houses of England while aristocrats took credit. People like she had been. "Thank you, Harrison," she said clearly. "I have only one instruction for now. Treat each other with the same respect you show me. I won't tolerate cruelty in this household, not to each other and not to anyone who seeks refuge here." A ripple of surprise moved through the assembled staff. "Refuge, Your Grace?" Harrison asked carefully. "This house will be a sanctuary," Elena said, "for servants fleeing abusive employers, for women escaping dangerous situations, for anyone society has decided doesn't matter. She paused. Because I know what it's like to be invisible, and I won't allow it to happen to anyone under my protection. The servants exchanged glances. This was not the kind of speech most duchesses gave. Most duchesses didn't think about servants at all except to criticize their work. But Elena saw understanding dawn on several faces, particularly the younger maids, who probably knew exactly what it meant to be treated as furniture by their employers. "As you wish, Your Grace," Harrison said, and there was something that might have been approval in his tone. "Shall I arrange your morning schedule?" "Yes, please. And Harrison, I'd like a full accounting of all charitable efforts currently funded by the Blackthorn estate. Everything we support, how much we donate, and who benefits." Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. "The Duke handles such matters personally, Your Grace." "I'm aware," Elena said pleasantly. "Now I'll be handling them with him. Please have the records sent to my study by this afternoon." She swept past them toward the breakfast room, leaving a wake of surprised whispers behind her. The Duchess of Blackthorn was not going to be decorative. The first challenge came within a week. Elena was reviewing the charitable accounts and finding them disappointingly conventional when Harrison announced a visitor. "Lady Margaret Harrow requests an audience, Your Grace." Elena's hand tightened on her teacup. She hadn't seen her mother since before the wedding. Part of her wanted to refuse, to deny Lady Margaret the satisfaction of even entering Blackthorn Manor. But another part, the part that had learned to use strategy instead of emotion, saw opportunity. "Show her to the blue drawing room," Elena said calmly. "And Harrison, stay within earshot. If I call for you, come immediately." "Of course, Your Grace." Lady Margaret looked smaller somehow, diminished by the grandeur of Blackthorn Manor's drawing room. She wore an expensive gown, but it was slightly outdated, suggesting the family's finances were strained without Marianne's anticipated advantageous marriage. "Elena," Lady Margaret said, then corrected herself. "Your Grace, thank you for seeing me." "Why are you here?" Elena asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Lady Margaret's composure cracked slightly. "I came to apologize. For everything. The way I treated you, the way I favored your sisters, the years of neglect and cruelty." Her voice wavered. "I was wrong. About you. About what mattered. About everything." Elena studied her mother's face, searching for genuine remorse. What she found instead was calculation, the same expression Lady Margaret wore when maneuvering for social advantage. "You're not sorry," Elena said quietly. "You're strategic. Marianne is exiled, Catherine is unmarried with limited prospects, and father's investments have been failing. You need my help." Lady Margaret's mask slipped entirely. "Is it so wrong for a mother to seek assistance from her daughter? From the daughter you called worthless? The daughter you dressed in rags while spending fortunes on her sisters? The daughter you allowed to be mocked and ignored for years?" Elena's voice remained calm, but each word landed like a blade. "Yes, Mother, it is wrong, because you don't deserve my help." "Elena, please." "Your Grace," Elena corrected coldly. "You will address me properly or you will leave." Lady Margaret flinched. "Your Grace, please. Catherine needs a dowry if she's to have any chance at a decent marriage. Your father's debts are mounting. If you could just speak to the Duke about a loan—" "No." The single word hung in the air like a death sentence. "What?" Lady Margaret's voice rose to a near shriek. "You would abandon your own family?" "You abandoned me first," Elena said. "For 23 years you made it clear I was worthless to you. Now that I have value, you want to exploit it. But I'm not the desperate girl you raised anymore. I'm the Duchess of Blackthorn, and I don't reward cruelty." Lady Margaret's face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful little wretch! After everything I did for you—" "You did nothing for me," Elena interrupted, her voice sharp as a whip. "You fed me because the law required it, clothed me in cast-offs, kept me around for appearances, but you never saw me as your daughter, just as a disappointment you couldn't afford to display properly. I gave you life." "And then you spent 23 years making me wish you hadn't," Elena said quietly. "But I survived, despite you, not because of you. And now I'm going to use my position to make sure other daughters don't suffer what I did." She stood, signaling the conversation was over. "Catherine will receive a modest dowry on one condition," Elena continued. She must choose her own husband based on her own preferences, not your ambitions. No forcing her toward the richest offer or the highest title. She deserves the chance to marry someone who actually sees her. That's ridiculous, Lady Margaret sputtered. How will she survive without a substantial match? The same way I did, Elena said. By being more than decorative. By having value beyond her face. She paused. Take the offer or leave it. But you will never receive another penny from me for your social climbing or father's gambling debts. Lady Margaret looked like she'd been slapped. This is how you repay your family? With cruelty? No, Mother, Elena said softly. This is how I survive you. There's a difference. She rang for Harrison, who appeared instantly. He'd clearly been listening as instructed. Please escort Lady Harrow out, Elena said pleasantly. And Harrison, she's not to be admitted again without my explicit prior approval. Yes, Your Grace. As Harrison led a sputtering Lady Margaret away, Elena returned to her desk and the charitable accounts. Her hands shook slightly, but her resolve was iron firm. She had just drawn a line her mother would never cross again. It felt like victory and grief tangled together, because she had wanted, desperately, for Lady Margaret to actually care, to see her, to apologize genuinely and mean it. But some people were incapable of love. They only understood power. And Elena finally had power of her own. The second challenge was more public and infinitely more dangerous. 3 weeks after the wedding, Elena attended her first major social event as Duchess, a charity gala hosted by the Queen's cousin to raise funds for orphanages. It was precisely the kind of event where London's elite gathered to feel virtuous while changing nothing. Elena had other plans. She arrived on Adrian's arm wearing a gown of midnight blue silk that made her look regal and formidable. The crowd parted as they entered, whispers following in their wake. The former nobody who became a duchess. I heard she turned away her own mother last week. Ruthless, that one, exactly like her husband. Adrian leaned close. They're afraid of you now. How does it feel? Powerful, Elena admitted. Also terrifying. What if I use this wrong? Then we'll fix it together, Adrian said simply. But I don't think you will. You know what it's like to be powerless. That makes you far more qualified to wield power than anyone born to it. The evening proceeded with practiced elegance, champagne and orchestras, and wealthy people congratulating themselves on their generosity. Elena smiled and nodded and played her role perfectly while calculating her moment. It came during the speeches. Lord Pemberton, whose son had once courted Marianne, stood at the podium droning about the importance of charity and society's duty to the unfortunate. His speech was full of platitudes and empty promises, designed to make the wealthy feel good without actually helping anyone. When he finished, Elena stood. The room went silent. Duchesses didn't typically speak at these events. They sat decoratively beside their husbands and wrote checks. They didn't participate. But Elena walked to the podium anyway, her chin high, ignoring the shocked whispers erupting around her. Thank you, Lord Pemberton, for that inspiring speech, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast ballroom. I'd like to add a few thoughts of my own. Pemberton looked apoplectic, but couldn't refuse a duchess without causing a scene. He stepped aside with poor grace. Elena surveyed the crowd, all the people who had ignored her, mocked her, tried to destroy her. Now they were forced to listen. I grew up invisible, she began quietly, in a house where I was fed and clothed, but never valued, where my mother invested in my beautiful sisters while treating me as a burden. I learned what it meant to be unwanted in a world that measures worth in beauty and dowries. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. This was not the kind of speech proper ladies gave. So when I look at orphan children, I don't see unfortunate souls in need of our charity, Elena continued. I see myself. Children society has decided don't matter because they lack the right families or the right faces or the right connections. Your Grace, Lady Pemberton interrupted nervously, while your compassion is admirable, perhaps this isn't the appropriate venue. For truth? Elena turned to face her. When is the appropriate venue, Lady Pemberton? When is it acceptable to acknowledge that our system is designed to crush anyone who doesn't fit its narrow definition of valuable? The room was deathly silent now. The Duke and I are donating £50,000 tonight, Elena said, and gasps rippled through the crowd. It was an enormous sum, 10 times what anyone else had pledged. But not to the existing orphanages, which warehouse children like inventory. We're establishing a new institution, one that educates children regardless of their birth, that teaches them skills beyond servitude, that treats them as people with potential instead of problems to be managed. She paused, letting the words sink in. And we're opening employment at all Blackthorn estates to anyone trained at this institution, regardless of their background or connections, because talent and character shouldn't require the right parents to be recognized. Adrian stood, moving to join her at the podium. His presence was a statement. They were united in this. Furthermore, Adrian said, his voice cold and commanding, I'm calling on every person in this room to examine how your own households treat the invisible people. The servants, the workers, the children society has decided don't matter. If I discover any estate connected to Blackthorn business is abusing their staff, that connection will be severed immediately. It was a threat, elegant but unmistakable. Cross us on this and suffer economically. Lord Pemberton looked like he might have a stroke. Your Grace, this is highly irregular. The proper channels for such announcements, the proper channels, Elena interrupted, have been failing these children for generations. We're done with proper channels. We're establishing new ones. She descended from the podium and walked straight to the exit, Adrian beside her, leaving an explosion of shocked whispers in their wake. They didn't need society's approval. They had power, and they were using it. The backlash was immediate and vicious. The newspapers called Elena the Radical Duchess and questioned whether Adrian had married a revolutionary. Conservative lords complained to Parliament that the Blackthorns were undermining the social order. Lady Pemberton spread rumors that Elena was mentally unstable, driven mad by her sudden rise to power. But something else happened too. Letters began arriving, hundreds of them. From servants grateful someone with power was acknowledging their humanity. From mothers whose daughters had been treated as invisible, thanking Elena for speaking their truth. From young women who saw themselves in Elena's story and found hope. Elena read them all, every single one, often with tears streaming down her face. Listen to this, she said to Adrian one evening, holding up a letter. This is from a maid in Yorkshire. She says she's been saving her wages for 6 years to buy herself out of service, but her employer keeps finding excuses to dock her pay. She's asking if our new institution will train women too, not just orphans. What do you want to tell her? Adrian asked. Yes, Elena said immediately. We'll train anyone who wants to learn, regardless of age or gender or background. That will cost significantly more than £50,000. Then we'll spend significantly more, Elena said firmly. I have a fortune now. I might as well use it for something that matters. Adrian smiled and pulled her close. You're going to change the world, aren't you? I'm going to try, Elena said. Even if it means fighting your entire class to do it. Our entire class, Adrian corrected. You're a duchess now, which means you have the standing to challenge them as an equal, not an outsider. He was right. That was the genius of it. Elena wasn't attacking the aristocracy from below. She was confronting it from within, using the very power and privilege they'd tried to deny her as weapons for transformation. The final confrontation came 6 months after the wedding, at the first graduation ceremony for the Harrow Blackthorn Institute for Practical Education. Elena had insisted on including her own name despite the scandal it would cause. She wanted everyone to remember that the invisible daughter they'd mocked was now educating the next generation of invisible people. The ceremony was held on the grounds of a former textile mill Adrian had purchased and transformed. The building now housed classrooms, dormitories, workshops, and a library that rivaled Elena's private collection. 50 students graduated that day. Orphans, former servants, children from workhouses. They'd been trained in everything from bookkeeping to engineering, languages to law, and every single one had a job waiting for them at Blackthorn Estates or with allied businesses. The graduation was attended by a surprising mix of society members. Some came out of genuine interest in Elena's project. Others came to mock or criticize or find fault, and one came to seek forgiveness. Lady Margaret appeared at the edge of the crowd, looking older and more worn than Elena had ever seen her. She approached tentatively after the ceremony concluded when most guests had moved to the refreshment tent. Your Grace, she said quietly, might I have a word? Elena considered refusing, But something in her mother's expression, defeat mixed with what might actually be genuine remorse, made her pause. "One word," Elena said. "Choose it carefully." Lady Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Sorry. That's my word. I'm sorry for everything I did to you, everything I failed to do, everything I failed to see." She gestured at the graduates, young people celebrating their futures with hope in their eyes. "You did this. Built something beautiful from the pain I caused you. That's more than I ever accomplished with all my scheming and social climbing." Elena studied her mother's face, searching for manipulation. What she found instead was exhausted honesty, a woman who had finally run out of strategies and was left with only truth. "Catherine told me what you did for her," Lady Margaret continued. "The dowry with no strings attached, telling her to choose for herself. She married a teacher last month, a kind man with no fortune and no title. But he loves her. She's happy." Her voice cracked. "I never gave her permission to be happy. I only taught her to perform." "Why are you telling me this?" Elena asked quietly. "Because I want you to know that at least one of your daughters found a better way," Lady Margaret said. "And because I need you to know that I see you now. Finally. Too late, but I see you." It wasn't enough. Years of cruelty couldn't be erased by one apology, but it was something. "I can't forgive you yet," Elena said carefully. "Maybe not ever. The damage you did runs too deep." "I understand," Lady Margaret whispered. "But," Elena continued, "Catherine can visit whenever she likes, and you may accompany her. Not as my mother, you lost that privilege, but as Catherine's mother, who is trying to do better." Lady Margaret nodded, tears streaming freely now. "Thank you. That's more than I deserve." "Much more," Elena agreed. "But I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for the person I was. The girl who desperately wanted her mother to love her. She deserves to see that you're at least trying to change." Lady Margaret left without another word, and Elena felt something shift inside her chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But a loosening of the tight knot of anger and pain she'd carried for so long. She had survived her mother's cruelty. She was building something better than revenge. That night, back at Blackthorn Manor, Adrian found Elena in her library reading applications for the next institute term. She'd received over 300 applications for 50 spots. "You're going to need a bigger building," he observed, reading over her shoulder. "I'm going to need 10 bigger buildings," Elena corrected. "There are so many people who need this, Adrian, so many invisible ones." "Then we'll build them," he said simply, "whatever it takes." Elena set down the applications and turned to face him. "Do you know what the most extraordinary thing is? Not that I married you, not that I became a duchess, but that I finally got to become visible. To exist as myself without pretending or hiding or making myself small." "You were always visible to me," Adrian said softly. "From that first moment in Hyde Park. I saw you then, and I see you now, brilliant, brave, absolutely extraordinary." "You saw potential," Elena corrected. "I had to fight to make it real." "True." Adrian pulled her close. "And watching you fight has been the privilege of my life." They stood together in the library he'd built for her, surrounded by books and possibilities, and Elena felt something she'd never experienced before: complete, unconditional belonging. The war wasn't over. There would always be people who resented her rise, who questioned her worth, who tried to push her back into invisibility. But Elena had discovered something more powerful than society's approval. She had discovered her own voice. And she was never going to be silent again. 2 years later, on a crisp autumn morning, Elena stood at the window of the library watching the grounds of Blackthorn Manor transform. 400 people were assembling for the 3rd annual Harrow Blackthorn Institute graduation. The ceremony had grown so large they now held it outdoors, in gardens that had once been exclusively for nobility, but now welcomed anyone who had fought to become visible. Annie, no longer a maid but the Institute's administrative director, approached with a schedule of speakers. "Your Grace, we're ready whenever you are. The graduates are asking if you'll share your story again this year." "They don't want to hear about me," Elena protested. "They want to celebrate their own achievements." "They want both," Annie corrected gently, "because you show them what's possible, that invisible people can become impossible to ignore." Elena looked at the gathering crowd. Students who'd been orphans and servants, mothers and daughters who'd been told they didn't matter. Now they held diplomas, job offers, futures they'd built with their own hands. This was her legacy. Not the title, or the fortune, or the power, but the people she'd helped become visible. "Tell them I'll speak," Elena said, "but keep it short. This day is about them, not me." As Annie left to finalize arrangements, Adrian entered carrying a bundle wrapped in soft blankets. Their daughter, just 6 weeks old, slept peacefully in his arms. They'd named her Hope. "She's perfect," Elena said, taking the baby gently. "Are you ready to meet 400 people who exist because your father saw what everyone else missed?" "I think she's ready to sleep through her mother's speech," Adrian said with a smile. "Just like I planned to." Elena laughed and swatted his arm. "You're required to stay awake. It's in your marriage vows." I must have missed that clause. They descended to the gardens together, Duke, Duchess, and baby Hope, to celebrate another generation of invisible people becoming seen. Elena took the podium with her daughter in her arms, looking out at the crowd. She saw the graduates proud and hopeful. She saw Thomas Wentworth, who'd helped her survive when survival seemed impossible. She saw Catherine and her husband waving from the audience. Even Bennett, the carriage driver who'd taken her to stop Marianne's plot, stood in the back row with several other soldiers turned teachers. And at the very edge of the crowd, almost hidden in the shadows, she saw Lady Margaret, watching, witnessing what her invisible daughter had become. "Good morning," Elena began, her voice carrying across the grounds. 3 years ago, I stood in a ballroom corner while my family paraded my beautiful sisters before wealthy men. I was invisible, unremarkable, not worth the cost of a decent dress." The graduates leaned forward, hungry for her words. "Today, I'm a duchess. But that's not what changed me. What changed me was deciding that invisibility wasn't safety. It was erasure. And I was done being erased." She shifted Hope gently in her arms. "Each of you has made that same decision. You've refused to disappear, refused to accept that your birth, or your circumstances or society's judgment defined your worth. And now you're standing here with skills and knowledge and futures you built yourselves." Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. "There will be people who tell you that you don't belong in the positions you've earned, that you're not good enough, not refined enough, not born right enough to matter. They told me that. They still tell me that. But here's what I learned. Their judgment says everything about them and nothing about you." The crowd erupted in applause. "So go out there and be brilliant," Elena concluded. "Be brave, be impossible to ignore. And when someone tries to make you invisible again, and they will try, remember this moment. Remember that you survived. Remember that you fought. Remember that you matter." She stepped down from the podium to thunderous applause, her daughter sleeping peacefully through the celebration, her husband beaming with pride. This was victory, not over her family or her enemies or the society that had tried to destroy her, but over the voice inside that had once believed she deserved to be invisible. That night, after the graduates had dispersed to begin their new lives, and the manor had quieted, Elena returned to her library. She sat at the desk where she'd once planned how to survive Marianne's poison plot, where she now planned expansions to the Institute and advocacy for labor reforms and letters to Parliament demanding change. On her desk lay a new application, this one different from the rest. It was from a girl in Manchester, 14 years old, called plain by her mother, dressed in her sister's cast-offs, told repeatedly that she wasn't worth the investment. Elena read the girl's carefully written words. "I heard about you, about how you were invisible and became a duchess. I don't want to be a duchess. I just want someone to see me. Please help." Elena dipped her pen in ink and began writing her response. "Dear Miss Sarah Collins, I see you. And here's what I want you to know. Being seen isn't about titles or marriages or meeting someone else's definition of valuable. It's about refusing to disappear. It's about finding your voice and using it even when you're terrified. It's about surviving long enough to prove that the people who dismissed you were wrong. You are worth seeing, worth investing in, worth fighting for. Come to the Institute. We'll help you find your strength. But the most important thing you need to know is this. The strength was always there. You just need permission to let it show. You have my permission. You have my support. and you have a place waiting for you whenever you're ready. With understanding and hope, Elena Harrow Blackthorne. The Duchess, who was once invisible too, she sealed the letter and set it aside for morning post, then looked around at her library, her sanctuary, her achievement, her proof that invisible people could become impossible to ignore. Adrian appeared in the doorway holding Hope, now awake and fussing softly. "She wants her mother," he said, bringing their daughter to Elena. Elena took Hope and held her close, breathing in that perfect baby scent while her daughter's tiny hand clutched her finger. "I'm going to teach you something important," Elena whispered to her daughter. "You will never be invisible in this house. Your voice will always matter. Your worth will never depend on your face or your fortune or someone else's approval. You will know from your first breath to your last that you matter." Hope gurgled contentedly, and Adrian wrapped his arms around them both. "She's lucky to have you as a mother," he said quietly. "She's lucky to have us both," Elena corrected. "You saw me when I was invisible. You fought for me when the world tried to erase me. You believed I was worth choosing." "You were always worth choosing," Adrian said. "The world was just too blind to see it." They stood together in the library filled with books and possibilities, their daughter secure between them, and Elena finally understood what she'd been fighting for all along. Not revenge against the people who'd hurt her, not acceptance from the society that had rejected her, but the freedom to exist fully, authentically, visibly, without apology, without shame, without making herself small to fit into spaces designed to erase her. The invisible daughter had become impossible to ignore. And in becoming visible, she had shown thousands of others that they could do the same. The war was over. Elena had won, not by destroying her enemies or burning down the system that had tried to break her, but by surviving it, transforming it, and proving that the people society tried hardest to erase were often the ones most worth seeing. She had been invisible. Now she was unforgettable, and she would spend the rest of her life making sure no one else had to fight as hard as she did to simply be seen. That was victory. That was justice. That was love. And it was only the beginning.